for it.
What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. I am your host, Clayton Kateri. Today's guest is I wrote that wrong. Today's guest is deep in the healing space. He hosts Ayahuasca retreats in the Sacred Valley of Peru. He does trauma healing. He does karmic energy healing. You could also go to this man if you want to learn how to open your channel. And so for him to be able to teach you how to open your channel, he must have his own open as well. And so he is a galactic channeler, which I found interesting because literally yesterday I was in an Akashic Records training to essentially open up my channel, and we talked about the galactic realm. So hopefully we'll get into that at some point in this discussion. But with all that being said, conscious monkeys, welcome to the show, Michael Thornhill. Michael, thank you for being here.
Clayton, everybody, thanks so much for having me. Absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for a beautiful introduction.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. So Michael, I always love to start off when you were a little kid back in the day, maybe you were probably 10-ish. I don't know. Well, I don't know what age parents usually ask kids these questions, but let's say between 8 and 14, what was the first thing that you wanted to be whenever you grew up?
I wanted to be a soccer player. So
okay.
There's a big thing over in the UK. Soccer, it's kind of like the biggest sport, really, seconded by rugby. So I actually wanted to start playing soccer, and then I got into rugby, and then I wanted to play rugby professionally. But when I was 16 years old, I got a pretty bad injury on my shoulder. Had multiple operations, which, interestingly, I now know kind of put me on a particular path that didn't take me down the professional sports route. Yeah.
And so with that being said, did that limit your ability to play?
Yeah, it stopped me playing. I got a scholarship to college to play rugby, which is slightly different to college in the States, but it was like 16 to 18, and I got to go to a boarding school, which was really my ticket out of my kind of like life. I saw that as my ticket. I was good at rugby. I knew I could get the scholarship. So I got this private school, boarding school, kind of a little bit like Harry Potter, Hogwarts kind of place in the countryside in England. And I got to go there, play rugby. But unfortunately, a few months in, I dislocated my shoulder and, tried to do rehabilitation, and it didn't work. And fell back into kind of partying and drugs and all that stuff.
All the fun stuff. Well, and so it's interesting whenever you say, I saw that as my ticket out, the only time I've really heard that phrase used is usually in the space of if you were brought up in a bad neighborhood. So were you kind of like in a rough neighborhood in England?
Well, I grew up in North Wales, so my wife's from America, so I have this conversation describing what the difference between England and Wales and the UK and Great Britain is, and honestly, I still don't fully understand it myself. But I'm from North Wales, and it wasn't necessarily a rough neighborhood, but there were rough parts, and I was in trouble. There was when I was about 13, 14, one of my friend's brothers was getting in some trouble with some bigger guys, and he didn't know how to stand up for himself. And I stepped in, and I just said, this guy's harmless. He's a guy who didn't fight back, didn't do anything, was very quiet, harmless, very nice guy. And I stood in, and I brought a world of trouble to my doorstep. And these gangs were chasing me. They were waiting for me outside of school, outside social gatherings with knives, trying to get me in the back of a car, in a trunk of a car, saying they're going to set me on fire. All this stuff, I really didn't know what to do. And by that time, I was looking at like this boarding school opportunity, and there's other things going on. Didn't really like the kind of place I was in, and I could kind of feel like the trouble I was in, that I could see people dying, people getting into trouble with the police, people going down the wrong path. So when I say ticket out, I knew that if I got myself out of that environment into a good school, that would be my ticket out. But in this situation, before I actually moved, It was actually the guys who were chasing me, the guys who were wanting to essentially, as they said, kill me, died in a car accident, and overnight,
Oh, wow.
it stopped. So I was very relieved. It's obviously not nice for people dying, but I was relieved because I felt like they were going to kill me. Yeah.
Wow. That's, geez. I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is like, talk about the universe helping you out. I mean, that might be a dark joke, but that's, wow. So was this all stemming just because you told them not to pick on your brother?
Yeah, it wasn't my brother. It was my friend's, my best friend's older brother.
Okay.
But yeah, it started from there. It started, and then they sent one guy to beat me up, and I beat that guy up. And then they sent the bigger guys, and then they came with weapons. And I remember my advice from my granddad, bless him. If someone comes to you, you just stick up for yourself. If someone hits you, you just hit them harder. And I realized that was just getting me in more and more trouble, So it didn't work out quite that way. But yeah, it stemmed from that. And I really noticed that was a really big armoring of my innocence, I would say, because I was not a fighter at heart. It's when I've kind of worked through that, processed a lot of that. But I really noticed that as a part of my life where I had to kind of put this thick skin on, be this person who was kind of like scarier than he really is. Kind of like you see those animals in the wild that have these like displays of like fierceness that don't really want to fight. I would say that was me. And that felt like the only way out at that time. And obviously that was, lucky time for me to get out of that.
It's really interesting because whenever I was younger, probably in like my middle school range, I kind of had a bully myself. And it's really interesting to me, kind of like looking back on that situation after kind of doing all the inner work and personal work. So I'm curious as to how is your perspective, because I could go into great detail about how my perspective has shifted, but I'm curious to you, how has your perspective kind of shifted, now doing all the inner work, understanding psychology, understanding how healing happens, understanding trauma? How has your perspective on bullying kind of changed, maybe since you actually experienced that event?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been interesting, even quite recently, that this has been coming up for me, like deeper levels and layers of that. And I was also going back, which one of my recent process over the last couple of weeks were even my friends. When you have like friendships groups and kind of like the guys like make fun of each other and that kind of like,
oh yeah,
oh, I'm a man kind of thing and all that stuff. I was like, that was really hurtful. So I've been going through a process where I could feel like even my best friends were even bullying me. And I noticed how I shifted my persona to fit in. So I shifted my persona to kind of deflect that bullying. And I noticed how detrimental, how much that I'd abandoned myself from that, and I can also see in those situations where I'd also kind of, perpetuated that in circles and not been so nice to other people and kind of that growing up. And I've kind of had to do a lot of inner work around, my perpetuation of that trauma and, kind of do the inner spiritual work around that. But ultimately it's just trauma that's passed down, because I don't think anyone's born a bully. I don't, there must be a perceived benefit that if I'm a bully, that's going to get me something. So if we can just kind of just cut to the chase and transform what that perceived benefit from bullying someone else is, and just get someone to access that unconditional love from the get-go, then I think we could just kind of like cut that whole bullying cycle out. And I think it's interesting how we've talked about sports or so early on, because I've not talked about sports for quite a while, but even in those circles, it's kind of like permitted, it's like the kind of camaraderie and the inner bullying and the kind of like aggression within that is promoted, so we have this whole cycle where if you actually exhibit these traits of kind of aggression, of closed downness, then you're actually awarded accolades by coaches, by people in the sports arena. And then you also get respect from peers, which creates a safety net, can often make you on some level attractive to other people And it's just like, well, where did this all start? How is this the life that we're living? It's just like, what a rabbit hole.
Oh, and you're so right. And what's coming to mind is even how your own grandfather was basically telling you, like, oh, well, if you get punched, just hit him harder. It's like, to me at least, that resonates as this doubling down on violent aggression, right? And I mean, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. So if everyone just keeps doubling down on violent aggression, humans aren't going to be in a great place of safety, security, prosperity whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more in the transformation that we can go through when we stop retaliating. If we can stop retaliating, because I think that's the real strength, is if someone attacks us, to find that place where you don't need to respond or retaliate. This doesn't mean not to have healthy boundaries, but like, if you look at all the acts of aggression in the world, for conflict to arise, they must be met with another act of aggression. That's what escalates. That's the fuel for the fire. And that's not to say that people shouldn't stand up for themselves or anything. I'm not saying I have the answers to the world's problems or anything, but just the question to ponder is, do acts of aggression continue if they're not met by acts of aggression? Now, in that situation with my friend's brother, it makes me think, if I'd not stepped in and actually put some fuel on that fire, they may have just in a week or two just decided, nah, I'm going to pick on someone else. And me thinking I'm going to be this kind of like knight in shining armor or savior, I've just added fuel to that fire. I was the act of aggression that responded.
And what's kind of interesting there, and maybe this is different, or maybe I'm projecting my own bully situation onto those guys, but the way that I've always kind of seen it, and that your answer kind of touched on it, is that their model for how they receive love or how they give love, it feels to me as if it comes from probably a broken household where aggression, or, whether it's verbal or physical, is what becomes perpetuated on them. And therefore, what I believe is that they see it as they need to go out of their way to perpetuate it on other people. And what happened in my situation is I wasn't retaliating back. Like I was kind of closing up, for instance, but I wasn't like dishing the, kind of that jabbing, like we were talking about, like between guys, where there's kind of that, that subtle putting down, but there's like a humor in it. Like there's humor in the putting each other down. And I wasn't retaliating. And I think that's what ended up, well, I'm 99% sure that's what ended up the fire, or the fuel getting put on the flames of the fire, which caused him to feel like I wasn't showing him love. I wasn't showing him love because his form of receiving love was being put down, was feeling that act of aggression. And since I wasn't doing it, the only way he knew how to express love was to continue this perpetuation of bullying me until I would bully him back, essentially. And yeah, and then so I actually got into a fight with him, and this is how it all stopped. And I remember it was just like this flood of emotions kind of released whenever I actually stood up for myself physically, of course, not saying it's the best in hindsight, but it was the only option I had left. And I remember he got suspended. And then the next day I saw him like in the hallway, and he was like, and this broke me whenever I couldn't figure this out for the longest time. He was like, man, Clayton, like I'm getting suspended. He's like, what's going on? And I'm like, and I was kind of like, are you serious? And he's like kind of talking, and he's like, we were just like having fun. Like, why are we actually getting in trouble for this? And that one interaction, like I still have it seared in my head. That one interaction like broke me for the longest time, probably held that for 10 years until I had this whole insight of how our childhood trauma feeds into our present reality, how we're all basically looking for love and don't know how to act it out. And I'm like, holy shit, like he was bullying me because he was trying to love me.
Yeah. What a world. What world we live in.
Right?
Sorry you had to go through.
What was that? I missed it.
I said I'm sorry you had to go through that. I mean, not only from, having that not wanting to respond, be aggressive, perhaps go beyond your natural kind of compassionate nature, but also to have that from someone who you care deeply about. I mean, it's tough, no?
Well, I mean, I think so, but I think that's kind of just like, it's probably just a part of the staging of you like realize this, right? Like you kind of have probably anger towards this person probably before that and after it a little bit, and then kind of confusion as like, so why did this happen to me? You know, does he really not see what he's doing? But I feel like I'm even at a point where it's like, oh, like I needed this lesson in order to understand a more complex nuance of the way that the human psyche even works. So, I mean, I appreciate it, but like at the same time, you know, I'm at a point of just being grateful for it because it has illuminated me to like look at bullying in this new light.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's beautiful. I'm glad that you've found that resolution and you found a peace with that. And thanks for sharing your story.
Ah, for sure, man. Well, in getting back to your story, you said something interesting where you were talking about how when you were with like guy friends, I think, and you were saying when you were making fun of each other, and you said that it would put you in a place where you felt like you were abandoning yourself. Are you able to expand a little bit on that idea of abandoning yourself?
Oh, let's go. I've had so many processes around this. I remember I had this like about a year ago when I was doing a plant dieta, which is basically like learning from the plants and being in isolation and fasting. And this is the kind of work that we do. This whole process over this dieta was, I was seeing all these points and places in my life where I'd abandoned myself, and then feeling the consequences of that. And so I'll take it back to this point where we're looking at. So like, I'll take it back to like the first day of high school. For the first day of high school in the UK is like 12, 13, something like that. Following on from my grandfather's advice, he said, if anyone hits you, you hit them back harder. So this guy hit me in the back of the head. They were making fun of me. We couldn't get through the door, and they were making fun of me, and they hit me in the back of the head. So I granddad on my shoulder, turned around. I was like, who hit me? And I punched this guy as hard as I could in the face, and he put me in hospital. Just like completely put me in hospital on the first day of school.
Oh, damn.
I was like, that was the first day of high school for me. So using that abandoning of myself, that wasn't my words, you know. And again, my granddad didn't know any better. He was just trying to look out for me. I don't doubt that. He wasn't trying to cause any trouble. He was just like, grew up, you know, probably born in like the 20s, the 30s and that whole thing. But I abandoned my true nature because that wasn't my true nature to go and hit someone. So in that sense, I'd abandoned myself. And then look where I ended up. I ended up in a hospital. And then I also got a reputation of being someone who hit back, which also played into the whole kind of my high school experience of like having to continually abandon myself to create this persona of someone who was able to stick up for themselves, when really inside there's just a frightened little boy just being like, please don't look at me. I'll do anything to not get this attention. I also learned, though, that I could make myself seem more aggressive than I was. And that seemed to kind of defend me without having to actually engage in physicality, which was, and I'm like the whole time, I'm like, please don't see, I'm bluffing. I have 2s and 3s at the table. Like I'm selling that I've got double aces here and like, please don't call me. But, you know, sometimes it did. And it kind of, you know, but, to like kind of go back onto that, abandoning myself, and how that links into the trauma, I think that we create that perspective of the world based on other people's perspectives and beliefs. You know, for the first 7 years of our lives, we're absorbing everything. It's forming our worldview on our shapes. And as we're growing up, then we have our peers, and then we take on those people that we respect, and we create this whole thing. And I think that can be completely bypassed if we're taught from a young age to how to access our own truth, and also that the power of uniqueness is celebrated, and that we're taught to do that. But in my case, it was just kind of like, you got to make it on your own. You got to work out what this world is like. And I can find in these situations, and I'd say in my present day life, how that kind of plays out. If I find myself getting a little bit frustrated, or, you know, being a little bit short with my wife, or just, you know, just like finding myself frustrated or answering to something in a way that's not as loving as I know I can be, that is the true nature, I can feel, okay, I realize that every time I choose that action out of like a negative emotion, every time I choose that, I'm abandoning myself, because that's not my true nature. So I think on some level, when we create a baseline level of conscious awareness, that when we choose, because ultimately I think when we have that baseline of awareness, when we respond from a contracted state on some level, we're choosing to abandon ourselves and perpetuate trauma. So I think that a really powerful exercise in my life has been, where have I abandoned myself? And this doesn't need to be just like about arguments. It's like, you know, I didn't go on that motorcycle ride that I really wanted to go on, and I did this other project. I abandoned myself. Or I decided that I was going to work late because I felt like a pressure for a deadline, but really my true self wanted to take a weekend away and go into the mountains. So it's like, it's been such a powerful process, because with that powerful process of inquiry, where am I abandoning myself? I think that's just such a great access point to finding the true self, because you can find all those points in your life where you're choosing something else.
That sounds pretty powerful.
Where am I? Pretty good.
Where am I abandoning myself? And like, how does that kind of come up? Is it from, have you felt that majority of these things have been impacted from, let's say, societal norms where you're quote unquote abandoning yourself in order to please others or to please society?
I think let's just go back to like that feeling of what you were discussing about you and your friend, and that wanting love underneath that, really wanting love. So you could say, you know, in that situation of like there being an abandoning of the self, from like the true self wants the love, but then the kind of traumatized self doesn't know how to do that and acts in a certain way. So for me in my life, I think it manifests. Like I can look at a point. Like one point comes up straight to me of like when I first smoked weed, when I must have been about 12 or 13 year old, and I had older friends, and I was instilled in me, don't do drugs, don't do drugs, don't do drugs. And, you know, I'm not saying that marijuana is a drug and it's a plant and all these other things, but from that perspective, I took that as a recreational drug. It wasn't for spiritual awareness. It was just kind of like, that's where I was. I didn't want to do it. And I know that I kind of felt the peer pressure, and I did that. And I know that took me down a path. And I'm also sitting here, and I don't feel like it was the wrong decision. So I can recognize that I've abandoned myself, but I don't necessarily need to regret it. I can just implement that now and think, okay, that I did that because I wanted to fit in. Because going back to that love wound, it's that wound that's like, I just want to have friends. I just want to be loved. I just want to be accepted for who I am. I just want to have fulfilling relationships. I want to be able to do all these things. And everyone was doing it. And I was just like, okay, you smoke the weed and everyone feels chill and you can kind of feel that connection and everything. And it just kind of like sent me on a certain path, you know? But I do think the one size fits all approach that we have to humanity, trying to put everyone in a mold, on some level we end up abandoning ourselves. And I think that that's the transition from third to fourth density consciousness, is everybody recognizing I'm a unique human being, a unique being with my own divine soul print. How can I be empowered to make the choices that are perfectly right for me, but would be completely incompatible to the next person? And it doesn't make one choice right or wrong. It's like this whole model for society that we have is that there's the model human being, and it's like, whose blueprint is that? We're trying to fit into someone else's mold. So what we need is more diversity, more intuition, more recognizing our true selves. And yeah, I think that question that comes through, like, how am I abandoning myself? It doesn't mean that if you're doing something that you would consider as abandoning yourself, is the next person abandoning themselves. Like a CEO who's running a Fortune 500 company, and this is exactly what he's here to do or she's here to do. That's not necessarily abandoning themselves. That's what they want to do. That's part of that expression of their soul's blueprint, possibly, not in all cases. So I think it's just, how do we connect to our truth? And I think when we start recognizing that everyone has their own truth, that there's no right or wrong, I think that we're all going to start like having a more loving, heart open society, because we're taught that things are right and wrong. And it's just like, okay, what happens if there isn't? If there's no right and wrong, what do we do now? You know?
And I mean, I think that's the de facto, right? Is it kind of ties into good and bad. Like we don't really know what's good or bad. And from a political place, people will often say like the common good. And for me, it's like, that's always a non-starter of a conversation, because look, I barely know what's good, quote unquote, for me. And yet you want me to make a decision in terms that's for the common good of everybody. Like, to me, it kind of comes like, if I hear people say that, I'm like, you're like, it's almost, I don't know. It feels like it's almost coming from a lack of responsibility, where it's like, oh, I know what's best for everybody, so everybody should do. And it goes back to exactly what you're saying, actually, with this mold of, okay, this is what we all need to do for the common good. And it's like, how do you know that everybody needs to do this one thing and everything will be all right? You know, and it's so fascinating you actually touch on this, because it's so true, where, you know, at the end of the day, maybe we need more diversity. And you know, it's funny as well that you bring up the job aspect, because for me, you know, on paper, I was a software engineer. I was not happy, so I ended up quitting my job and starting a podcast. And it was the most like enlightening, or not enlightening, I guess enlightening, but more centered. I was no longer abandoning myself, to go to your words. And I was so just like centered by doing that, where I started thinking everyone needs to quit their jobs. Like, this is what we all need to do. And then I ended up staying with a buddy of mine in Orlando for a week, and he just absolutely loves life, working his 9 to 5 as a software engineer. And it opened my eyes to exactly what you're saying, where it's like, okay, some people can absolutely love their 9 to 5, while others have to go out and start their own podcast. And it comes back to, okay, do you have your own podcast yet your real desire is to be a gardener? Or are you being a software engineer and you actually love doing that from 9 to 5 and then playing video games afterwards, you know? And it's breaking away from that societal mold to just be who you are and not abandon yourself for the society at large.
Yeah, no, I love that. And good for you for finding, you know, that power to just say, this is not working for me anymore, you know, because I know that's not an easy decision. It's not, you know, for anyone who's out there and just like, oh, you know, someone's left their job and they're going for all their dreams. It's like, okay, that's the kind of like the cover story of like, you know, on the cover of the magazine, like, man leaves 9 to 5, starts a podcast. And like, you know, like the kind of like the production notes to that movie is kind of like, you know, in my case, when I left, is like, man, is super scared about, am I making the right decision? Where goes my security? What am I going to do? Am I going to, you know, all this other stuff. So like, kudos to you for just going. I don't pretend to know what your experience of doing that was, but I just know that it takes bravery to step into that truth. I think it takes bravery to overcome the fear of making that change, because there's so many societal fears and norms that are put into the 9 to 5, the peer, the society, the 401k, the kind of the healthcare, the insurance, all these other things, which makes you rely on that system so that you never escape it. You know, you become that rat. I think that's why I call it the rat race, because you're just in that cage. And I think in the cases of many, the door can open, and I don't think people will leave, because it's so self-containing, the system and the society that we built, that's everyone's living in, for the most part, in individual housing, having individual families, needing to survive for themselves, needing to make so much money, inflation going, the whole economy, you know, driving the way that we live our lives. So to take, when that wave, and when I say a wave, powerful politicians, powerful corporations, it's the whole way that we're born into the world with this lens on, that we basically just see 3D as this is the way that life is. And it's like, who made those rules and who's it benefiting? So then to start questioning that, it's like when you watched in the Matrix, when it's like the one with the red dress and they turn around. When you start questioning that, family, friends, peers, bosses, everyone starts sowing the seeds of doubt. Oh, you shouldn't be doing this. What about you're throwing your career away? You need this, you need that, you need the car, you need the house. So it's like, to actually go and take that step, which you've gone taken, I mean, it's just kudos to you, because it's not easy, you know? So, and I just, you know, I respect you for doing that.
I appreciate it. And a lot of stuff was coming to me as you're talking about that. And it's, you know, there's a lot of, let's say, build up to it. You know, a lot of the things are kind of just hearing educating myself through reading or just hearing so many things that are like along the lines of, you need to do what you fear, and trust in the universe. Those are the two core themes that kind of are coming through right now. But, living in that modality of like, it's like, what do you fear the most to do? Like that's usually where life lives, in a sense. That's where it like exists. And after hearing enough successful people say that and it resonating with myself enough, I decided to no longer abandon myself and listen to that and to dive into that and say, okay, like I have what am I doing here? You know what I mean? Like everything on paper was like great to exactly what you're saying, but it's like at the end of the day, you come home to yourself. So it doesn't like really matter. And it's like, I had I had savings, working off savings until, the podcast got going, kind of that whole thing. But it's, and the next level of that is just having that trust in the universe that it's going to provide. An analogy that I've always used on here is like, if you're living in New York and your end goal is to, let's say, drive to Peru. I'm not sure if you can drive there. You probably can, right? We'll just assume.
I'm not sure. I go through some dodgy territories.
Let's say we'll say Mexico or something. But the point is that you don't need to see the entire road to get there. You just got to know you need to go south. Just go south and see 200 feet in front of you. And this just magical thing occurs whenever you kind of like release this control, and control is another interesting theme that's been coming up in my life as well. But when you release this control to the universe, it just finds a way to pave that road for you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I absolutely love that. The imagery that comes to me, I don't know if you remember the Indiana Jones film. I can't remember, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or I can't remember what it is, but he's going over to get the Holy Grail, and there's like the path going across the canyons, and Indiana Jones just has to put his foot out, and as he puts that foot down, the path's there, and no one's gone across that path because it looks like it's an impossible place to travel.
It's invisible, right? The path's invisible. Yeah. Yeah, and then he throws like the stuff across it.
Yeah, it's I think Indiana Jones must have had like a big impact on my childhood, because so many Indiana Jones analogies always come up when I'm working with people and movies. I'm like, yeah, Indiana Jones again. But no, I absolutely love that. That analogy of just like, you need to go south, get there, the road signs will appear on the way. Trust that, because it's so overwhelming if you're like have to plan the whole thing out. And even if you do plan the whole thing out, you can't account for the roadworks, you can't account for the diversions and other things that go on the way. And I think the one thing for anyone who's done a road trip, when you just get to a fork in the road and you just go, do I go left or right? And there's no map. There's just like, which way do I go? And you just like go, and then you find this amazing, thing that you would have never seen that wasn't on the map, So I think that transition, like the first part, and and again, I'm not like here like I'm 100% trust the universe, because I'm just like, I still get fears, it's still like I'm going to take a step forward. You don't have to be 100% trusting the universe to take a step, right? So if anyone out there is like, I've got to be 100% trusting of the universe before I take this next big step in my life, probably not going to take a step, because I mean, to get 100%, I've always said, if I can get 80% on something, that's like a go for me, and I'm probably getting like less and less. Kind of a bit more trust, but yeah, cool. Like just that fun that arises when you not only trust the universe, but you trust that that's actually going to be exciting, that's actually going to be fun. So I think that's when you start moving from surviving to thriving, when you start actually believing in it. I think that's kind of like when it gets fun, it's like when you can trust it.
100%. And one of the new ideas that I kind of just came up with is to think of that extreme, right? Like imagine that the extreme opposite, excuse me, would be to fully plan that trip from, let's say, New York to Peru, where you literally map out every single road you're going to stop at. You map out the gas station that you're going to pick. You map out, let's say, where you're going to get food, the hotel you're going to stay in. You map out, what inch of road you're going to cover, all the stuff, right? It's like, where's the excitement in that? You already know what's going to happen. You already know the entire trip. So why even go on it? Like, there's nothing for you, It's like you already did it.
Yeah, I totally get that. And then, like, I think it was also interesting, like tying back to what we said before about like people's soul blueprints. Perhaps there's someone out there that's like, that is so exciting for me. That's so exciting for me to know every step of the way.
Sure.
But for me, for sure, like that excessive planning, like sucks dry that it kind of like, you know, when you go like tenpin bowling, I think you call it tenpin bowling in the States, or bowling, with just bowling, right? You know, you kind of have the things on the side of the lane,
bumpers.
Yeah, the bumpers. It takes the fun out of the game, right? It's like you do it. It's like, okay, so it's like take those bumpers off and like
there's no risk.
Really start bowling. Yeah.
There's no risk. I mean, and this is actually a really fascinating thing that I actually came to as well with regards to my job is, you know, you assume that there's no risk because you're working for somebody else, but when you take a step back, you're actually putting yourself in more risk because you're putting more trust and faith in this company that you have no idea, unless you're in their finance department, you have no idea what their financials look like. You have no idea if they're going to be able to pay you in a year, 2 years from now. I mean, you know, it's like a soft guarantee. It's like if they go belly up and lose all their money, it's like, you know, there's not going to be any laws that hold them accountable to supply money for you for the next 40 years. And so to me, it's like, well, it's risk either way. It's risk if you go out on your own and start your own business, and it's a risk if you actually stay with this company. So which risk do you want to play into?
Yeah, I know. It's totally. And I think that's the thing that's behind the scenes, that it's that false sense of security that we buy into. That any moment, if the powers that be decide that you're no longer in their best interest, then, you know, you're out on your own anyway. I think one of the interesting things to look at, and this has also been kind of like a good motivator for me in my life alongside where am I abandoning myself, is like, if like money didn't exist on the earth, if we didn't play this whole game of having to, you know, earn money and live the life like we do, what would I do? You know, what would I be doing? How would I be showing up if money wasn't a factor in this thing? And I think that's been a really big refinement process for me. And like, I can tell you straight away, like in terms of our business and our work, for the most part, I feel like pretty aligned with that. But I tell you one thing, I wish I'd have more time to ride my motorcycle, which I don't have because I had to sell it. But you know, when I say my motorcycle, I mean my future motorcycle that I'm going to rebuy.
There you go.
And make more music, you know, so I can feel that as soon as I say that straight away. It's like, okay, if I didn't feel that kind of like, oh, you know, we're running the business, we got our retreats, we got, you know, the whole thing of continuing to reopen after the pandemic and stuff like that, I can just feel straight away. So I think what I'll take out of this conversation is just like, and I've been feeling this over the last couple of weeks, it's like, how can I start integrating more of that music? And I think that's the next level of trust for me. And I've been feeling it of like, you know, I've been doing a lot of work, I've been doing a lot of promotion, we've been doing a lot of stuff, we've been doing a lot of preparation for our retreats reopening back up. And I can feel that, not an abandonment, because I don't think it's an abandonment, because what I am doing feels like it's heavily aligned. But there's that kind of just like, there's like a glimpse of another reality where I can do all the things to run our ayahuasca retreats and our business at Casa Galactica and all that stuff. But then I can start like nurturing the inner child that just wants to just take off for like 2 or 3 days and ride in the mountains, you know? And yeah. Like, so I could just feel that, like the level of peace of like, I can feel it's coming. But like the thing that gets me is like, I can feel it's coming, but then am I delaying it? Or could I just like, after this call, you know, start playing some music, write another song? Or is it like, am I delaying my idea of what I think to be more balanced as something that's in the distant future, that I'm like, if I just do a little bit more of this, or just do a few more days, you know? So that's kind of my battle, because I think if I 100% trusted the universe for me and my own story, there'd be more play in my life. That's where I feel like where the grips of capitalism like still holds on to me. And it's like, we live in a capitalistic world where I live. We know that's kind of like the rules that are played to a certain degree, you know, where we have to make money to pay our bills and do the things that we want. But I used to run a headhunting company. I used to run do recruitment and headhunting, and I got successful and made my own business. And again, I kind of got to like the top of, I wouldn't say the top of my game, but I got higher and I had my own business and I had the money, and I was like not happy. So it's been such an interesting process for me. And also my wife, because she's also Capricorn. We're both Capricorns running a business. That means we do a lot of stuff. So, but like noticing where the feeling of lack or those kind of feeling of like, okay, I just got to do a little bit more to like kind of be productive. Noticing where those like talons are still kind of like gripping in from that kind of collective consciousness that we live in, you know. And I left my company. I left the West like 6 years ago, you know, and I've been living in Peru, and thankfully we've been able to create a really loving, authentically aligned, where we feel completely aligned in our business. And, you know, that changes and shifts from day to day, and we continue to be more, but it's like, okay, I can put that passion and creativity in there, but it's like, where am I still operating from the fear-based lack beliefs that the universe is not going to catch me if I take 3 or 4 days off? I mean, where's that come from? You know? It's like, where's that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's deep rooted in exactly what I think you already know the answer, and I think you said the answer in that message, because what it's relating to me is I actually yesterday I had a Akashic reading, and then I also had like part 3 of my like training to actually learn how to read the Akashic records, and one of the questions I actually asked the Akashic records was that, like, you know, I find myself in these moments where I want to do something, and I like want to do something for my podcast or business or, you know, to, you know, create and cultivate and do something. But it's this mixed energy of there not being anything to do. It's like, I know that there's nothing I could like there are things to do, but nothing I'm feeling called to do, but I have still that energy of doing. And so I asked it, I was like, you know, when I find myself in this situation, like, what should I do? And basically what was told to me was just like, you know, it's a symptom of essentially what you said it's a symptom of like, I'm not gonna be able to word it as beautifully as they did, but it was along the lines of, it's a symptom of, you know, this capitalistic society that we live in, where it's kind of like always do, always go. It's a little bit of wounded masculine, where you have this feeling that you need to keep doing. And what kind of came through is, you know, a flower doesn't need to do anything to be a flower. It doesn't need to constantly be doing something. It doesn't need to be constantly be drinking water, constantly growing. The message was essentially is like, there's time where you can just be, and you can just enjoy being. And I was like, fuck. I was like, I had a feeling you're going to say something like that. And so to your point, you know, I think that there probably is this mix of, you know, I think that we do live in a society that has a heavy wounded masculine, which, if we relate this back to the earlier part in the podcast with, you know, the idea of bullying, I think that comes from a wounded masculine perspective. Some people call it toxic masculinity, but I feel like that phrase has the wrong connotation nowadays. But so it comes from a wounded masculine. So I think it's that wounded masculine mixed with a capitalistic society that always has this in this perpetuating feeling to need to do more, and that there's more I need to do. And yet the universe or Mother Nature, or the feminine, the unhealed feminine, is sitting there saying, no, we can just do nothing. We can just be and enjoy nothing.
Yeah, no, I think I really like the way that you bring that back to the wounded masculine. And I think I can feel like from that wounded masculine of what we've been talking about, the bullying and kind of other traumas that occurred earlier in life for me, there's this, and I know it in myself, my own process, there is this deep wound of feeling unsafe. And then, you know, talking about that as the masculine, the kind of masculine archetype being like the protector or something that keeps it safe. So I can feel that, you know, it's really nice. It's bringing a deeper level of awareness to me there of like how much of that wounded masculine comes through into the doing that wants to keep my family safe, you know, keep our business moving forward. That's that really is that wounded child that's just like, can someone just keep me safe? And I'm already aware of doing so much, you know, okay, where's that fear come from, you know? But when you were sharing that, I could feel my nervous system just relaxing. It's like, Clayton says it's okay, I'm a flower, don't worry about it.
Smart nervous system. And the other thing that's actually coming into my mind that I'm feeling called to share with you, I've shared this story so many times on my podcast, and we can go into the deep details of it. But from a high level, there's a past life that I've been dealing with, or not dealing with, that has been coming up a lot with me. And, you know, this story spans back 8 months ago, and there's a whole bunch of evolutions to it. But the core crux of it is essentially that I like lied to a king. This king ended up like tying me up, beating me, and then in front of me had my wife actually like gang raped in front of me. And so what essentially I just came to realize yesterday was that for me, a huge issue with my wounded masculine is the fact that I don't want to go into the feminine. Like that trauma that happened for me, right? Happened for me. It made me view the feminine as weak. It made me view it as like, okay, well, if I'm weak, if I go into my feminine energy, I can be taken advantage of. And, you know, of course, that just happened yesterday. So it's this whole integration piece that I'm still, obviously, it just happened yesterday. I'm trying to figure out now that balance between like, you know, where is the pendulum shift? How do I get that pendulum to sit right in the middle of the yin and yang of, you know, balancing that masculine and feminine energy within my life, given all of this?
Yeah. Wow. Well, what a deep revelation with, I'm sorry that doesn't sound too comfortable to re-experience that. I can imagine how that would leave an imprint on the soul wanting to heal that. And I mean, how beautiful that you have an awareness and your own ability to be aware. Okay, this is influencing perhaps how I'm showing up or how I react or behave in certain situations. So I think that's really beautiful. I think from my own process, you know, my dad wasn't around when I was growing up, and I think I thought a lot of men can find themselves not having that father figure in that role, and the father and people who are around not having the mature masculinity that we really all desire. That mature masculinity that's like, if someone attacks you, you just want to like distance yourself from it. Don't provoke anything. Come and talk to me and I'll deal with that. You're a young boy. You don't have to stand up for yourself. You know, if some mature masculinity is like coming in and showing that, you know, how many of these immature masculinities, the wounded masculines, wouldn't have not cemented themselves in our personalities, because that mature masculine would have shown a better route from New York to Peru. It would have shown the best route that you could go. Like, this is the route that you want to take. You don't want to go down that road. There's some kind of road works that's going to be annoying. It's not safe down that road. Someone who's going to guide you safely to where you are. But I also think that there's also an opportunity, I think, on planet Earth, and I may be slightly controversial in what I say, with love in my heart, that I think that there becomes a big identity that people attach to with divine masculine and divine feminine. And for me, in my own experience, I'm like, yeah, that's totally useful. Like, we're having like a really great conversation about the wounded masculine and how that, being men, how that can affect us. And also there being a wounded feminine and all the rest of it. But my point being here is, at what point do we all see ourselves as one, beyond gender identity, beyond the idea of masculine and feminine? Like, so many people have come up to us like, oh, you feel like the divine it's all about the divine feminine at the moment. And my wife and I are just kind of like, we don't really have so much gender identity in kind of, unless it's kind of brought up. And yeah, I just think it's a really interesting conversation to say, okay, how useful is separating out divine masculine and feminine? And as I say, completely recognize that it's useful. But if we keep adding more layers of separation onto us as a species, like, how useful is that? How useful? Or is that just another way of wrapping up separation in a perhaps more spiritually advanced terminology?
It's an interesting point. And where my mind is going, and maybe we can touch on your galactic channelings, they might come in to help here. Where my mind goes to this is that, you know, there's a couple conversations here, right? Number one is the fact of, let's call it gender, where we're saying male versus female, like, biologically male or female. And then there's also the conversation of masculine and feminine being the energies, right? Because you can be a feminine male and you can be a masculine female, or, vice versa. And usually the way I see it is that in relationships, and if somebody doesn't believe what I'm saying here, because I've had this conversation with very intelligent people and they've missed the point. It's like, even in gay or lesbian couples, there's usually someone who holds more masculine energy and someone who usually holds more feminine energy. And so to that extent, I guess I'm trying to parse out essentially what you just said, where like my understanding is that Earth has the most polarity, and it might be the only Earth that experiences this heavy of polarity with regards to yin and yang, masculine and feminine. That's my understanding. And so, I think it's that piece of reintegration where we do need to come back and acknowledge the fact that we are at this, like, well, I guess I don't want to say that, or at least be able to find that middle ground. And so I'm trying to figure out how to integrate that conversation into what you kind of just laid out about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it came across to me as if you feel like it's not, I don't want to say that because that's not what you said, but there's this ability to almost avoid the feminine and masculine. I know you didn't really say that, but maybe that's how I was hearing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can elaborate on what's coming up when you're saying.
Please do.
Like, what's being shown to me is kind of like the yin and the yang, and you kind of look at that, at the whole circle, and really it's like the whole circle is like kind of the whole thing, and you can separate that out to the yin and the yang, but once they're perfectly balanced, they live in complete harmony. So it feels to me like that in my experience, what comes up is that when the healing of the wounded masculine and the healing of the wounded feminine, or the healing of the masculine and the feminine, unite, that there becomes no separation between the two, that it's kind of like the lock and the key that come together, not one better than the other, that actually come in perfect harmony. And again, like you say, this doesn't need to be like biologically male and female. It can be masculine and feminine. And I think, we can all admit that planet Earth has been masculine dominated in immature, in a wounded masculine way for kind of centuries. So I think that's why. And I think it's when we're talking about a pendulum swing before, there's a talk of integrating the divine feminine. And I think that's awesome, that we're bringing more feminine energy into the earth consciousness. And I think, myself, I know that there's been a lot of integration of feminine energy into my own being softer, being more open-hearted, being more compassionate, being more caring, being more receiving, trying to receive love, noticing how difficult that is. But I think in this balancing that we're going through in the earth, I think there can be a tendency to, rather than see that as a balancing, to then continue, like the goal in my experience seems that the balancing of the masculine and the feminine is coming back into the oneness. So it's taken us into that point where there's no separation between the two, but we can get stuck. And I think in some circles, we can get stuck on focusing on, okay, we need to be really masculine, or we need to be really feminine. And that can be an answer. That can be a pendulum swing that is an answer to a call of deep levels of oppression, or deep levels of it being one-sided. And that pendulum swing can be necessary for us to go, kind of to the other side, extremes. But I think that where I'm going with this is kind of like, how do we get to that balance? Because I think that's all what we really want, is that we want that balance of the masculine and the feminine inside ourselves. Because I feel like once we balance that masculine and feminine energy within inside ourselves, I think we find more inner peace, more inner harmony, and in our life, our love, our relationships, our work, that balance. But it's that inner conflict, that inner war, of that pull, that push. Which way are we going? And so I think it's been tough in my own life to try and balance that. And I think, as just coming back to the bullying, and I think this is coming back to also anyone who's kind of like lived in a broken home or not had the perfect upbringing. I mean, who has the perfect upbringing? Not having those people who are healed, aware of consciousness, sharing what that balance is, that we end up seeing kind of like a broken figurine of whatever that may be and trying to replicate that in our own life. So we're kind of trying to, like, if you look at like DNA, and then the DNA strand, if the DNA strand has kind of got something going on in it and it's not in its perfect harmony, and then that gets replicated from parent to children. You know, we don't have the kind of like the perfect genome, trauma speaking or healing speaking, to kind of copy. And I think that's what's so beautiful about you know, podcasts like yourself and the beauty of the internet now is that, oh, hold on, the blinkers are taken off. We can actually see and have all these other access and viewpoints available to us right here and now, that it's getting more and more difficult for people to stay enclosed in their one perspective.
Right. And the shadow side of that is that with the internet, you have access to everything. So by having access to everything, it becomes like this pick your own adventure. And what I noticed in my life was that I went down some dark rabbit holes of, let's say, forums, which I felt like there was truth in, but, you know, it was very deeply rooted in wounded masculine energy. And, you know, I absorbed those for probably 2 or 3 years. This is also something that came up in my Akashic reading yesterday. But regardless, the point being is that you find these things and they validate thoughts that you already believed. It's like, this is essentially what happened. I don't know how much you pay attention to like the 2016 election, but even any social media for that matter is like, the whole goal of them is to keep you on their website. So they want to self-validate the beliefs that you already have. So, you know, you click like on something, you retweet something, you do this. It's like, all right, we're just going to keep giving you more of that because we know that if we keep validating your already current belief, we're going to keep you on the page. And the problem with that is though you have a current belief, that doesn't mean that it's the belief that is of your highest self or for the highest self of, you know, the individual, or even finding that balance in the yin and yang, because you could be liking stuff that is very deeply wounded, masculine or feminine. And then you're just going to keep getting fed more of that. And all you're doing is pulling back you're pulling that pendulum all the way into the far corners of the yin yang.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting with regards to the social media. And we deleted our social media accounts about 2 years ago. And that was, talk about trusting the universe, and to bringing it back to abandoning ourselves. We noticed that we were not enjoying using social media for our personal work, and we were just more and more using it for promoting our business, promoting our work. And, you know, we had a lot of followers and we had, you know, a good connection there. And we noticed over more and more time that it became less and less effective. And then what we noticed was that more and more that we went on social media, the more that we'd feel anxious and stressed after being on there. And, you know, talking about now, again, bringing it all together of the kind of the soul blueprint, is that we're seeing everyone's blueprints, people expressing their blueprints, or at least the digital version of what they want them to think your blueprint is. And then people are trying to people feel inadequate because they're not living up to someone's blueprint or what someone else's life is. And we kind of all know that with social media, there's so much kind of pretense that's involved with that. We watched one of those documentaries which kind of went into the election about showing how Facebook just keeps you on the page, and they're just feeding you what you believe already, so that you're like, see, everyone thinks this. See, this is what the world's like. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And then you live in that bubble, which is just reinforcing your own negative beliefs, turning you into a puppet for profit. And it's like, once we kind of saw that, we were just like, I think we'd actually saw that a little bit after we got off Facebook. But coming back onto the trusting of the universe, and again, like the societal norms, and I still get people today are like, oh, you're running a business. You really should be on social media if you're running a business. I'm like, thank you very much. I choose not to, but I didn't normally go into that.
Yeah.
But there was a big pressure of like, okay, you need to be on social media. You know, you need to be on social media. So when we took that leap, we created our growth portal on our website, where we started creating videos, articles, and we just brought everyone directly to our website. It's when I first got into podcasting, connecting with awesome people like yourself. Actually made like awesome connections around the world. Many people I've recorded podcasts with or are now called friends, that we've had just like mutually beneficial relationships that people then like. What was so interesting was there was maybe like 50, 60, 70% of the people maybe dropped off. And I'm probably sure that they don't even know that I'm alive anymore because it's been 2 years without making a post on social media. He must be dead. You know,
Right.
it's kind of like quite interesting. What we found is that we made much, much deeper connection with people, had much more involvement with our clients, and yeah, our business became more profitable.
Interesting.
But that first terrifying moment of like, oh my God, we're deleting social media. And it's like when you delete it and they're like, are you sure you want to delete it? And you're like, are you sure? We're going to leave you another 30 days to make sure that you're really sure. And then it was all gone. It was, man, we jumped off the cliff.
Yeah.
And it was one of the best things that we ever did. Personally, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, profitability, business-wise. And we run our business completely without social media. We don't do any of that. And it's like when we create great content, we have loads of ways that we connect with people. And it's been rewarding. And I remember when I moved back to like where we are now in the Sacred Valley, there's a lot of Facebook groups that actually like have things on and events and other things and kind of community content. And you can get on there to kind of like sometimes when I first got on here, I was like, do we need to be in these groups to kind of survive here? Because this is what the whole community kind of does. So I kind of just went on there for a second without creating an account. And I was just like, I feel terrible. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the feeling that I was in. So very interesting. It's a myth that you need to be on social media. It's been debunked by ourselves. Doesn't mean that we're not afraid of how we're going to do our business and things, but it's kind of like what we were talking about before. Like, you know, going from New York to Peru in the car journey, we just knew we had to go south. And the people, the interactions, the opportunities that have come our way from getting in that car, if we were still on Facebook, we wouldn't be in that car. So it's just like, it's really, really, really expansive for us to do that. So if anyone's out there is thinking like, I've been thinking about doing that, just trust that it's going to work out, because if you're not enjoying your experience on social media, and if people are enjoying their experience on social media, absolutely zero problem. For people who've got a big following, it's beneficial for business, people are loving it, zero judgment about that. But if you're out there and you're feeling like, actually, I do feel like maybe I'm abandoning myself by continuing to play this game, recognize that there's something more aligned out there for you. And are you going to get onto that wheel, or what the next cog of your expansion is, if you're still being bogged down by something that's not in true alignment with yourself?
And that comes back to our whole, finding your own blueprint in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And it's really fascinating because what was going through my mind as you were talking about that was like TikTok. I've never really used it much at all, never really dove into it. I would kind of post videos here and there. And over the last week, I actually kind of started sharing these like eye-inspiring, that's not the phrase, eye-opening kind of ideas with people, if it's about your pineal gland, if it's about, social interaction, experiencing miracles. And I kind of developed my own little, like, let's call it atmosphere for myself. And what ended up cultivating is, within a week, I think my followership increased like a couple 100%, so it was like this like 400 or 500% increase in a week. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so cool, like blah, blah, blah. And then it was crazy. What was crazy was what happened next. I found myself becoming more addicted to actually going on TikTok to get the validation from the likes, from the new follows, that constant stream of, those numbers going up. And then I actually found myself wanting more. I found myself thinking to myself, like, why is it only 500%? Why is it not 600 or 700? And it's like, if you get a 500% increase on anything within a week, like, you should take the next month off, like whatever you're doing, and you generate a 500% increase in a week, do it, just stop, And yet I
Mhm.
still found myself in that place of, I want more of this place of, I keep opening it up now more frequently. I should check on my phone. I should actually check the screen time after this and see the increase in my, attention span that I've been putting into this app, where it's just even just opening it to receive those numerical validations that are it's completely fake validation. It's like a dopamine hack that, obviously runs amok, and then people find themselves looking at these things 24/7, or even like myself, where you're just using this as personal validation. And it's like, it's not contributing anything to my life. I mean, I know that it's helping other people because of the comments on there, which feels good as well, and maybe those are a little bit more genuine, but it's not where I'm going to get those dopamine spikes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I think it comes back again to me. I think we're just having a few themes that are coming through in this beautiful interview of just, where am I abandoning myself in that process? Because using TikTok to promote, to connect, to inspire people is like great, right? But then I think this is like, just using this example, and this is how I've applied it in my life, is like, but within that, where am I abandoning myself? And I think that's how that usage of social media, the usage of whatever app it may be, of any of the other things that we do in our life, it's like, it's such a bitter sweet question to ask oneself, because it's like, do you really want to know the answer? If you ask and you search and you recognize where you're abandoning, because I think that's what's really interesting about consciousness expansion work. Because like, I think kind of like the Hollywood movie of the consciousness expansion is kind of being enlightened and, being Buddha and having all these synchronicities and having all the abundance and the law of attraction, all this stuff come to you. But I think like the really kind of like gritty work is like, where am I unconsciously abandoning myself? And am I willing to see that? Because my mind is telling me that that's something that I actually love. But if you're willing to see a different perspective, are you willing to see a different perspective that may influence you to take a left rather than a right in the next turn? And short-term benefit, like the dopamine hit of whatever activity that may be, may take a hit, and you may feel a slump or a low as you're kind of detoxing from whatever it may be that you've been abandoning yourself, whether it be alcohol, substances, sex, work in different distorted ways, or whatever that may be. From my own life of addiction, I can see that, and like coming off substances for the first bit, it's not easy. It's not like everyone's like, oh, great, you're clean now. Great. How's day 2 going? It's like, no one's like, that's great. It's like, it takes a while. But once we detox from those things that are no longer in alignment with ourselves, it's like going in the garden. It's like going in the garden and taking out all the weeds. It's like not an easy job. It might hurt your back a little bit. It's like tough work, but then you create that fertile soil for your garden to grow in alignment, So I think that's like, it's a lot of the work that I do with the people online in my trauma healing sessions and in our work on our retreats. It's like helping people to turn towards the unknown and helping people to trust that if you let go of something that's not in alignment with you, you never really wanted it.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, if you're going to let go of something that's not really in your highest good, even if you can't see it, like right now, it's trusting something more than the human ego, the human mind, that it's going to be working out. So I think that's when it comes back to that trusting of the universe. It's like trusting those, when you get to that fork in the road, something telling you, okay, I know the kind of like the map says right, but I really feel that like left is going to be the way I'm going to go. And I think that's when we can create really radical change in our life, when we tackle head on the things that we don't want to look at, the thing that's lurking in the dark. And this analogy that always comes up, which is really interesting, is like the unconscious that we go to face can often be really scary, whether it be addiction, can it be shame, it can be guilt, it can be things done in the past, it could be people we bullied, it could be other things that we kind of grew up and we just like, oh, I can't believe I did that. When we face that, this imagery comes forth of like looking at a massive shadow on the wall that looks scary, like a big scary monster. If you can imagine like a big scary monster on the wall of the bedroom in the dark, and you actually approach it with the light, and it actually shows up that it's just like a small figurine, that the light is projecting something that's much more scary on the wall. So then if you saw that same shadow again, you're like, oh, it's just a figurine. It's not as scary as it used to be. But if we spend all of our life avoiding, running away from those things that cause fear, and this doesn't mean that you have to go and run and just face all your fears. That wouldn't necessarily be trauma informed or the right way to do it. But if we can edge with support, with help towards those things that are unconscious, that unconsciously manifesting things in our relationship, our work, our life that we don't actually prefer, when we can face towards them, we can recognize that it is a figurine, not a giant monster. We can begin to disarm those programs in our life and start actually living the life that we prefer.
That's beautifully put. And it all comes from by, I guess, tackling those fears. And maybe this is where it actually gets a little bit difficult. And this is kind of why it can be helpful to bring on somebody like yourself in order to see those aspects of what you're missing. Because like with your weeds example, I'd argue pulling weeds is a lot easier because you can actually see where they are. And it's the same process for all of them. When we're talking about humans, it's a little bit more complex. And on top of that, the crazy part is sometimes you're not sure why. Like you don't even know why certain things are the way they are. Like you feel like something is off. Like for me, and this is going back to my Akashic Record story. For me, I was, it was manifesting as like I guess I don't want to call it an addiction, but I guess addiction is the word for it. But an addiction to porn in my life presently. And I couldn't figure out for the longest time, like why that was, like, why is this happening? And the way that the universe unfolded for me, I was like, oh, here's this thing that happened in the 1700s that is coming up as, this addiction in your current life. And I was like, oh shit. Like, and even just having that realization, it drastically reduced my usage by like 80 or 90%. So, just the awareness of knowing where those blocks are coming from, even that in itself can have profound effects to start the healing process there, which sounds like a similar thing that you went through with your actual physical addictions.
Yeah, I think, firstly, thanks for sharing that. And what a magnificent just turnaround, just like changing your whole experience there with that awareness. I think it's beautiful and profound. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
And yeah, with regards to the awarenesses that arise and how they shift and change, I think the first thing that it can really invite into our lives, which is often not given, is a level of self-compassion and self-love. And I think that that's one of the big shifts and changes, which I think you touched upon, of that shift from blame to, okay, something happened to me and I've reacted in a certain way and I behave like this, So like if you put a hand, or if a kid put a hand on a hot stove and moved their hand away, no one would blame that kid for moving their hand away, right?
Right.
And like just coming back and kind of dissecting my life as we've kind of gone quite far into some of those parts of the bullying, just coming back into a part of that, it's like, it's not my fault that my granddad told me to punch someone. I just took the advice of a guardian who had my best interest at heart. And I went and did that. And there was loads of consequences from that, but that I can't really blame myself for that. That was just the way it happened, So a really deep level of healing that can come, whether we gain, one level is that we can gain a perspective. We can gain a perspective and be like, okay, this happened because this happened. And okay, and now I don't have to blame myself. I can have a deeper level of self-compassion for myself. I can kind of free myself from all this because I worked out what happened. The kind of quantum leap is just like self-forgiveness now, because you're an infinite loving being, and anything that's untoward or anything's away from that is because something happened to you on some level. You can you can just go straight to that without having to unpack every little event in your life. Now, both are great ways to heal, but I think that as we have societal healing, if we look at like the prison systems, which are completely, it's like, that's like the 1700s or beyond, that we just kind of someone did something bad, so we're going to lock them up and we're just going to pretend they don't exist. That's just like putting people into the unconscious, the collective unconscious.
Sure.
No one wants to see anyone in a prison for the most part, you know, and you kind of watch a movie or a documentary and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is what kind of people like live like. And we to start treating people like wounded individuals, I think is how we're going to have that collective healing. And you have to look at places like, I think it's in Sweden or Norway, that they've completely eradicated the prison system, where they start people who have committed crimes, they then give them into rehabilitation and programs that treat the trauma. So collectively, if we can begin to treat the trauma, then we're going to shift our awareness into forgiveness, into recognizing that, okay, who is to blame? You know, who was the original trauma? who was the original trauminator?
Eve.
If you want to call me who?
Eve. It was the women. She ate the apple.
I was thinking that. Yeah, you go back to Adam and Eve, and it's like, okay, great. You know,
I'm just messing.
Yeah. No, I know. Once we look at planet Earth and we recognize no one alive is responsible for the level of trauma that's on planet Earth right now. So we could, on some level, I mean, this would be like an audacious kind of forgiveness of the whole planet, but on some level, and you could, you know, and I've been sexually abused myself, so I'm not just saying this, like, we could on some level say, let's forgive everyone who's abused, killed, murdered, done all these things, because on some level we can recognize that the origination of that trauma has not occurred from anyone that's alive living today. So we could give everyone a pass. We could on some level give everyone a pass and say the trauma didn't originate there. That's not to say that we should get rid of and say that people shouldn't be accountable and stuff, but I think just one viewpoint to investigate is like, has anyone on Earth now originated the trauma, or has everyone's trauma been passed down from somewhere?
Well, so I might push back on that idea a little bit because, and maybe I don't have a full scope of understanding of this, and you didn't seem to flinch whenever I brought up a past life. So you must be on the same page of past lives where, you know, how do we maybe not know, or, you know, that, you know, it's not this incarnation from one of our past lives, right? Because isn't there, and I'm kind of out of my scope of understanding here, but like, you know, if you learn all the lessons you need to learn, you basically stop incarnating on Earth, is what I've come to understand, right? So, I'm not sure where I'm trying to go with this. I guess I'm trying to attack the angle of you saying that, you know, none of this is our fault for being here with this trauma, which at a level I agree with, right? I agree with the idea of like, it's not your fault for your trauma, but it is your responsibility to heal it. Like, I believe in that philosophy. I guess I'm trying to now integrate that idea into the idea of having past lives where, well, I have been on this earth before. So how do I not know that something I did in the 1700s, maybe before that, because I assume that wasn't my first life, but maybe it was, but at least in the 1700s, maybe I did something that, well, I know that there's something that occurred that now I'm experiencing the ripple effect of it in 2022, but yet it was still me that did it in 1700s, but now I'm feeling it still to this day in 2022. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I like the inquiry. I think the first thing that comes back up to is that we're still viewing it from the point of good and bad. We're still labeling things as something good and bad. If we actually just took away the word good and bad out of that whole thing and we just label it as an experience, I'm experiencing a ripple effect from the experience without it necessarily being good or bad. Okay. The second thing, what I was referring to in terms of the level of trauma on the planet, was looking at things from kind of a linear time scale of kind of 3D, third density of people being on the planet, that we can just look at here from that point where we have the judicial system and we have people blaming people and doing these things, that from some level to invite the idea that every human that's alive in this lifetime can't be responsible, isn't responsible for the level of trauma that's on the planet. So I'll get back into what you said in a minute. So that's just like, because let's say probably 75% plus of the planet live in third density Earth, and most of the politicians and leaders of the planet and kind of do these systems actually live in that life. Let's just say, again, not assuming too much, perhaps that's not right. But yeah, then going back to the level of experience of what you're talking about from being in a past life, I think we can all just put our hands up and say, we've had past lives that we've all done things that perhaps from the perspective that we own right now, we wouldn't be proud of. So we can kind of just be like, okay, everyone's kind of done stuff along the way out of all these infinite number of incarnations. We've all done stuff along the way that where we are at in our journey now. And I think this is the shift where I'm at in my perspective of life now. I can see that that's not something that's actually in alignment with myself. And just to bring back the theme, I can see where those things that I've done in these past lives or other lives on some level may have actually been abandoning myself. Another way of saying that would be where I was steeped believing in separation, where I was believing in the duality of things and I was out to serve myself, where I decided to, on some level, put my faith in separation. And when we're talking about abandoning myself, to take this another level into like deeper level of consciousness, when we recognize that we're all one infinite consciousness, that we are all the I am, the infinite creator, anything that's actually in alignment with that belief, I would say on some level is abandoning ourselves. So anything that we've done through those incarnations, in my understanding and through working with different galactic beings, channelings and stuff, I can feel that when we choose things that are actually against our true nature, which is an infinitely, unconditionally loving, infinite being, we are abandoning ourselves. But to come back into what you've said, Clayton, about like now in this life, we have the opportunity to see it from a different perspective and heal those wounds. We have it, say if we did something in the 1700s that we were like, actually, that wasn't the best thing for my friends and my family. And now we have an opportunity with what we've learned through those lifetime experiences to say, actually, I choose love. I'm choosing love this time. So would you be able to choose love at the level and intensity right now if you didn't choose love, if you chose against love, if you didn't choose against love in another lifetime as like the kind of great reflector of, I prefer love, I choose it. And I think that that's what's so interesting about the incarnation that I'm living, at least. I know a lot of other people that are in my circles and friends, is I think the big question is, how do I choose love in spite of all the trauma? How do I choose it unconditionally? How do I choose love without myself needing a certain outcome from that? How do I choose love without any benefit other than the fact that I'm choosing love? And I think from my understanding, that choosing of unconditional love at the best of our ability is moving towards ourselves, is choosing our true self, is choosing that unconditionality, is I think one of the most powerful things that we can do in the face of adversity.
It's quite wild you say that, because over the last week or two, I've been dealing with a family situation. I'm not going to go into too deep details of it because I want to, it's recent, it's personal, there's, family stuff, but the exact theme of it deals around unconditional love. And so I just want to point out that I find it quite fascinating that that's something that you're kind of dealing with right now as well. I guess it doesn't really surprise me anymore, but I guess I'm still a little shocked by it. But the other thing that was coming through as you were talking about this was, coming back to my Akashic Record story. And as I was saying, in order for me to get chained up and those terrible things to happen to my wife in front of me, what I was also shown was that I ended up lying to a king in order for that to happen. Well, in the most recent relationship that I had in 2022, I guess it would have been 2021, the girl who I was dating wasn't being completely honest with me about just certain things. Like it would be like, it would be little things that would prevent us from like hanging out or doing things. And it was just her holding back some of the truth. And so the inner reflection comes is like, okay, why did Clayton manifest that in a partner? And what came back to, and this was in my Akashic reading yesterday, was that this story was also a manifestation. she coming into my life was also a manifestation of this story in my past and so it was so fascinating how this one story, related to porn addiction, related to this girl, let's say not telling the whole truth, you know what I mean? Not lying, but just not telling the whole truth. And, it's also linked to, what was the other thing that it was linked to? Oh, the being afraid of feminine energy and not wanting to dive into feminine energy and trying to be in this wounded masculine state, essentially. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember where I was going with that, but I found it fascinating that it actually has all of these different heads. One incident created all of these different, like a Hydra effect onto all of these different areas of my life, that it's like, the Akashic records, the intergalactic beings, whatever is trying to communicate with me is like, hey, this is the scene that we're going to evaluate and push into your life in current time in order for you to get to the next level. Why did I bring that up though? I can't remember. I don't know. That was coming to me whenever you were talking about whatever you were talking about.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I've got something that comes up I could share about if you like.
Please do.
What's quite interesting in channeling sessions that I do for people online, sometimes people ask about past lives. And like you've had in your experience of having that understanding from a past life, it's been incredibly powerful for you to understand some of the traits, experiences, traumas that have developed in your life. And you've been able to move from that to a level of compassion and healing and done this great work and sharing about it and inspiring other people. So awesome. The other side of what always comes up to remind people, even if you don't have any awareness of a past life, the things that will manifest in this current life, even if you just stayed focused on this one life, on the healing of the body, mind, and the spirit, from whatever arises to you in the present moment, will be able to heal all past lives. So I think that as you were saying about those current situations that were coming up, I think like the interesting point is like, if you just focused on the current day situations and you didn't have that past life experience, perhaps you may have still healed it. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe it would have taken like 3, 4, 5, 6 more painful experiences for you to be, okay, I kind of finally heal that wound. But I think it's just, in my understanding, the body and our imprint that we incarnate in this life is a karmic imprint, and that is a map that we can use to heal all incarnations. So I think it takes the pressure off of like, oh, okay, what you were talking about in terms of healing and then having a different level of experience because we heal our incarnations on earth. Like, my invitation is that this life? Is that here and now? Why wouldn't it be?
Time's an illusion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because, in this relationship, amazing girl. I don't want this to come off as a bad way either. I mean, amazing girl. And I, obviously we're focusing on a very small subsection of the relationship. I mean, but I found it interesting because, to your point, it's like, okay, so to your point, and maybe this is going to be a little bit of a pushback on what you just said, but, I found that in her, I could see that there was slight lying that I knew wasn't in my highest interest for my highest being. And so I could feel that. I could feel energetic blockages whenever those instances would occur. So the question, though, becomes why am I attracting that into my life? I know I don't want it, which is very powerful first. But then to ask yourself, why am I attracting that into my life? Do you not believe that there needs to be let's say, a root cause for the manifestation of that to come into my life? Because like you're saying, if we're cosmic, I don't know if you said cosmic code, but cosmic like materialization of all of these things, I would have had to have gone into a past life in order to understand where this came from. Because for me to attract someone into my life who's being a little bit less than honest, it would have had to have been a reflection of something that I did in the past that I'm still needing to reconcile, right?
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a good point. And I think that comes back to like the soul blueprints. like for you, the perfect way to experience and heal that was to have the Akashic record reading, to recognize that. And I think that is also quite a powerful question as well. What you've mentioned is like, why am I attracting that into my life? I think that can be a very powerful point for inquiry. But I think the point that I'm expressing is that we can use the tools of going into the Akashic records or channeling galactic beings, plant medicines, whatever it may be, to have awareness of these other timelines, these other experiences. But at the same time, if we don't have any of those experiences, if we just live our life, those things that we are working on, those themes will come up into our awareness field. And if we meet that with presence, I believe that will heal. So again, it's just kind of like you can use whatever vehicle it is that you wish to expand in your consciousness. And why not? Why not go into past lives? Why not go into the infinite nature of the universe? Why not channel extraterrestrial beings? Because that's fun and exciting. You don't have to be in a classroom learning about some kind of like psychological term or something like that. You can, that's great. But there's all these things available to us. So my back would be whatever works for each individual in their expression of their lifetime, to find the pieces of the puzzle and then put them together to heal and evolve.
I'm right on the same page with you, where it's like, this is fun. Like, this stuff's so fascinating to me. It's like, even though how traumatic, it is to watch your wife get raped, it's like, to me, it's so fascinating at this point to be like, holy shit, like that realization of like all of these things that have come together in order to form so that I could learn a lesson from something that happened 300 years ago. It's like, to me, it's super exciting. And I've had these conversations with my mom before, and she's actually kind of pushed back, where she's a little bit more on the side of like thinking it's overwhelming, and I guess I'm just trying to highlight the corollary to what you pointed out, because I'm all on board. I'm on the same page as you. But speaking with my mom, it's kind of like, I get this sense of her feeling is like it's overwhelming. She's like, why would you like, she's kind of in this mindset of like, it just seems like it's too much for her kind of deal. And she's probably the biggest fan of this podcast, so I know she's listening. So she, so in her mind, it's a little bit more of like it's just almost too overwhelming for her, where she's just like she's like all supportive of me doing it, but then to her, it seems like it's just too much to take on, so just as a corollary to kind of, coming back to the soul blueprint idea.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome, Hi, Mom, by the way. Thanks for listening. Nice to meet you. But like, whatever happens in someone's life, I think in these tools, I think, look at like 30, 40 years ago, where people weren't even really talking about emotions. People weren't even necessarily recognizing that trauma probably wasn't even a word in terms of the emotional context. Maybe it was. Fast forward to where we are now, and I think that there's so many different tools, there's so many different keys to each lock. There's a key out there that's unique for you, just like someone who listens to like Metallica and the other person listens to, Led Zeppelin, or someone listens to Aretha Franklin and just whoever feels like whatever it is. It's like, there's like that innate attraction to whatever is aligned with your soul, and that is expressed through excitement. So using that in how you're working with those, with the Akashic records, and how that's exciting for you, that's in my experience, that's like a signal that like the lock and the key is fitting together and it's opening and it's doing work. The same sense, to use your mom as the example, that would be overwhelming, where perhaps, reading a spiritual book or listening to Gabor Mate talk about something may be more resonant and may be a better fit. The key might be a better fit for that lock. And I think that's what's awesome, that we have so much therapy and more and more people doing therapy. I think, I know we said that there isn't good and bad, but I think that there is some therapy that's better than others. In my experience, working with therapists that are more body-centered, more somatic experience has been vastly, vastly more awakening and transformative for me. And then, you know, we look at like in the last 30, 40 years, how many people have the access to yoga and qigong and meditation and other things that was only once available if you went to an ashram in the Himalayas or whatever it may be. And I think what the Renaissance right now and what we're really excited about is how the ancient technologies of plant medicines are really just kind of being a rocket ship for people to transform and heal and evolve their lives and take, you know, what might have taken 10, 20, 30 years before can be done in a 10-day retreat. Now, in terms of when we work with people, we're very, very clear with people from the start. If you want to come and do an ayahuasca retreat with us, it might not be the best key for the lock that you have. You may be better off going to a support group. You may be better working with us online. You may actually be better working with a therapist who's actually specifically trained in an area that actually really fits really well for you. So we're very, very cautious and careful when anyone wants to come. Is like we come back to what is the intention? What's the intention for you here? And then working out whatever that best methodology is. Now, someone might say, okay, like let's liken ayahuasca perhaps. Again, this is not a literal likening, but to like a Ferrari. And you'd be like, okay, great, we're on a Ferrari. But actually what you actually need is something that's strong and stable that's going to be able to do the commute. And like, I don't think anyone wants to commute in a Ferrari. The amount of difficulty, you might get it scratched, you know, it's going to take a lot of gas. So it's like, what is that vehicle for you to take the next step? And imagine if you're kind of like traveling, say we're going from, because, you know, this has come up and I hope someone from New York is going to do this drive from Peru and let us know what it was like because it's come up sometimes. But imagine you're taking that drive from New York to Peru, and then you kind of have one vehicle, and then perhaps you take a train, and then you go, and then you take a boat. The vehicle which is suitable for you for wherever you are on your journey may change. You don't have to have one vehicle. But I think where wisdom comes in is recognizing where you're at in that journey and being honest with yourself about what that key is for you where you are right now.
I think that was really well put. I think that there's a lot of truth in the idea of many different modalities and that they can be used for different things. I know, I mean, it does seem like, and this kind of goes back to the whole blueprint of the soul that we keep touching on, is where the soul can have different modalities to heal. You need different things in your life to kind of show you different aspects. You need, you know, like if I'm looking for new ideas, I'd pick up a book. If I'm trying to find blind spots in my life, I would try to, you know, I'd hire a coach. If I know what needs to be healed, I would go into meditation or journal. And, you know, for somebody else, all of those could be completely different. The end goal, and it's interesting, I'm just thinking about this now, it's something I actually talk about in my digital course, is that the end goal would just to be aware of all the tools that you have available and then be able to use them. You know, it's like, you know, if you need a screwdriver, it's like, well, do you need a Phillips or a flathead? You know, it's not like both of them are going to do even the same thing, even though it's literally the same tool, a screwdriver. There are still different variations in which you can use a different one for different purposes. Even that fine-tuned nature of, well, I need to screw something in. It's like, well, there's still that extra level of like, well, which screwdriver do you need? And so, you know, you can't take a hammer to it, obviously, but it's just like there's that different level of abstraction to it.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. And I think that sometimes, you know, and I think this happens with plant medicines because, you know, plant medicines can maybe be likened on some level to kind of a power tool that's kind of like just going through and just like getting the job done quick, and it's very powerful and can move and get things constructed and deconstructed in the way that you want them. But like if you're kind of carving a very nice small wooden figurine or a chess piece, that's not going to be beneficial for you. So I think that that's where that real wisdom comes in that you've spoke to about those different tools, is like the wisdom comes in knowing out of all these tools which are available, out of this plethora of magic which we have access to now, which is the most suitable part for me in this part of my healing and evolution. Where is this? You know, we've, in quite a few channeling sessions that we did, the cliff notes when we've had different questions that have come through about plant medicines, about yoga, or about about other tools for remembrance, as they were described as, is that there is these different technologies which are inherent within planet Earth that, in my experience and what's come through a channeling, are left on planet Earth from more advanced civilizations, that from what time has forgotten, what our history doesn't know about, that are left here. And that's when you can kind of go back to the ancient scriptures and other things like that, that these technologies are actually tools for us to be able to remember. So whether it be plant medicine, whether it be yoga, whether it be meditation, and kind of like the ancient technologies, breath work being another great one. These are all different tools, like you're talking about the flathead and the screwdriver. And it's like, you got to just be honest with yourself about what is right for me. And even within plant medicine, you can then look at this very many different plant medicines, and gentle, like different Ayurvedic herbs and teas and adaptogens, through to kind of entheogens and ayahuasca and psilocybin and wachuma and stuff like that. So I think the wise man recognizes that there are tools available. And I think if you look at that from the evolution of kind of like Neanderthal through to like Stone Age and Bronze Age, if you recognize the advancements of civilizations occurred because they were able to recognize that tools were available to them, and they used those to build, to change their society. I think the invitation is to look at that we have these tools like meditation, plant medicine, channeling, spirit and being, as this kind of like, okay, we have these tools available for us now. Like, how do we go from the kind of the same level of us going from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age? How do we go from where we are now to, I think it's to the next level? And I think that the wise civilization, I think that the mature civilization, once wounded masculine, wounded feminine unite into that oneness and live in harmony, look at how do we integrate those tools into our society in a trauma-informed way that's going to actually help advance our civilization. In the kind of like this kind of war on drugs and things that we're still like living in, and plant medicines getting bundled into that. It's like, how do we take that stigma away and recognize that we don't need to lock people up? We don't need to have people in psych wards. And that's not to say that we should just let everyone run around and muck. I'm not saying that we should just let everyone out free. Please don't get me wrong. But my invitation is, how do we start transforming that trauma? And it feels like there's so much available to us right now. I think we'd be silly not to use what resonates for us.
And speaking of what resonates, this is going to be a sharp turn, but multiple times you've mentioned galactic beings, and what came up in my Akashic record conversation the other day is I don't know, I know I want to work with like the Akashic realm, the astral realm, the earth realm, and I think there was another one, but then right at the end she brought up the galactic realm, and I was like, okay, that really resonated with me. What's that? And she was like, oh, like, galactic beings, the GFL, aliens. And I'm like, yeah, we're definitely putting that in my pathway. So we added that. So let's start off with, like, what is your history? Let me see where I want to start this. Maybe let's start off of, what was your very first introduction to the idea of ETs? When were you very first, exposed to the idea of extraterrestrials, of beings that are would they be considered of third density on different planets?
I mean, there are different beings that would be of third density on other planets, yet the beings that we interact with are usually of fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh density, more often than not in the fifth, sixth density, seventh density realm. And now for everyone who's listening, recognizing that where we are on Earth right now is the third density, shifting into fourth density. So kind of like the density of being self, or being isolated into unity consciousness. So then moving up the levels of density into kind of seeing all timelines at once, having access to the remembrances, the intimate consciousness, not being behind the veil of illusion, allowing us to then get access to this different levels of wisdom, and then be able to use this, just like we talked about the tools from the Stone Age, using these tools as actually something that's going to advance our civilization. So that's the kind of channeling work that I do, is in terms of working with these beings. And that's what most channels do who are here in service to others, is learning how to access different spirits and beings and things like this. So when you ask me what my first interaction or awareness of ETs or aliens would be, the first thing that comes up, my favorite band when I was growing up was Blink-182. I don't know if you know that song by Tom Long, had like Aliens Exist.
No.
And I used to sing that song, hey mom, there's something in the back room. I can't remember that. So that was like subconsciously.
I got to find that song. Sorry, Go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off, but I didn't know that. That's amazing.
So I wasn't expecting that, but that was like Blink-182, my favorite band growing up. Tom DeLonge, who's actually then become long since a big proponent of disclosure, of asking governments to release UFO files, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it wasn't something that was kind of like a big thing for me in my life, in my rat race job, my kind of closed down consciousness, capitalism, like trying to get as much money as possible and be successful, et cetera, what we've already talked about. So fast forward to my first ayahuasca ceremony, when I actually drank ayahuasca when I was in Berlin, living in Germany, to heal addictions. And I've talked about this many times before to my audience about healing the addictions. I went in, I didn't even realize that drugs. I realized that I wanted to stop cocaine and other drugs. I didn't even recognize that alcohol and cigarettes were addiction. I was just like, I want to get rid of the hard drugs. And around about my third or fourth ceremony, and I get kind of emotional just even feeling about it, I went into the ayahuasca retreat that I was there at, and one of my intentions alongside the addictions was to kind of like feel a little bit more of like, okay, what is out there? You know, what's this all about? Is there life after death? My mother had died about a year before, which is one of my primary reasons for beginning to investigate consciousness and meditation. So I was kind of like not really a believer. I'd started getting into meditation, some sound healing. I'd started having some contact with my mother's spirit. I wasn't really aware of it. I was freaked out, to be honest. But in this retreat setting, and bear in mind, what I'm about to tell you, this is not how we run our retreats now. It wasn't in a ceremonial setting as much as it contained. But in the retreat where I was actually outside in the garden, talking to someone, looking up at the stars. And I wasn't super in the medicine at that point. And I was looking up at the stars, and I was pondering, you know, kind of asking a question, if there's something out there more, please show me. I went and had another cup of ayahuasca and went back down to my mat. And just a disclaimer, that ayahuasca ceremonies that we run in a very contained, trauma-informed space where the whole space is held shamanically. This was not that type of ayahuasca ceremony. Yeah. When I went back down to my mat, and I actually went back to the corner part of the room, which was actually in the dark, and as I was sat on this chair, this hand appeared to me in my mind's eye. And it was in my mind's eye that I could kind of see this kind of hand, and it was like, you know, kind of like 3 fingers or something like that. It wasn't a human hand. And the facilitators, they were talking about get outside of your mind, get outside of your mind. There was this whole thing, this preparation ceremony, which was really great. And I remember, so I was like, get outside of my mind. And this hand then materialized in front of me. And it materialized, like semi-materialized, semi-physical, kind of appeared in front of me. And I put my hand out into it, and it touched it. And this energetic wave went all down my arm, it gave me all this healing on my shoulder. And this is one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. I got transported out to like looking at the earth. And I could see, you know, if you like look at the pictures of the earth at night that has the lights where everything is connected, I could see the energy of the earth, that everything was connected. And I zoomed out, and I zoomed out, and I could see the whole solar system was connected. And I zoomed out even more, and I could kind of feel like the whole universe connected. This is all happening rapid fire, and it's beyond the words. It's kind of like a whole knowing, a feeling, a sensation, an emotion. And I felt myself with these extraterrestrial beings that very clearly showed me pretty much the entire content of what we've shared today in the podcast of, this is not your soul blueprint. The things that you're doing in your life are actually abandoning your true life path. You're here to do these other different things in life. You're here to heal and grow. The alcohol, the cigarettes, the drugs, every time you're doing that, you're completely abandoning yourself. You're taking yourself away from what this is. And then it was showing me that I'd come and incarnated on Earth to have a specific path, which I wasn't really fully aware of what it was, but it was just insinuating that there's more. And it felt like it was to do with healing. And, you know, I would say what's kind of manifested now where I am sitting now is a part of that journey. And it was incredible. The feeling of this love, feeling of everything. I could just see so clearly everything I've been told about capitalism, making money, doing my company, all these things that would make me happy. I could just know without a shadow of a doubt that they were a lie. And I could see that I was a prisoner of the construct of the earth and what the society made. And it was then after having this like deep transmission and being there, and I could feel myself wanting to vomit, because part of the process of ayahuasca of purging can be vomiting. And I could feel myself wanting to vomit, and because I could feel it was so intense. Like it was like in an instant, everything you've been taught about your whole life is a lie. That's kind of like a lot to take. That's a lot. And it's not like, you know, we've been kind of insinuating, perhaps planting some seeds for people to be able to have their own direct experience in this podcast. And you've been planting over numerous episodes to people to start away. This is kind of the power saw. This is not making a chess figurine. You know, this is cutting through everything. And I was just there, and these ETs were with me, and they were so loving and so friendly, and they were showing me all this stuff. And then eventually I couldn't take it anymore. And I kind of like came back to the room, and I keeled over on the floor, and I threw up into a bucket. And it just felt like, you know, when Neo's in the Matrix in the first time, he's like, this is, you know, I want out. And it was just like that. And it was like, oh my God. And in that instant, I was like,
He's going to pop.
Yeah. I popped big time.
I remember.
And I was like, whoa, I can't go back.
You can't go back.
I stopped smoking, stopped drinking, stopped everything that night instantaneously.
Incredible.
And then within a month later, I closed my business. I was in India studying yoga and Reiki in Nepal as well. And then I moved my way to Peru, and I went and studied in the Amazonian rainforest, where I then continued to study, and then met my wife, and then was hosting and facilitating, now running retreats, and built our business in service to all, which was kind of like the premonition from that all came through that ability to then say, step into my truth, which is one of the most absolutely scariest things I've ever done.
Wow. Yeah. That's incredible. There's so much to touch on there. I think I'm going to touch on what we started this with, though, is the getting back to the aliens, because I feel like that's a conversation that's becoming a lot more prevalent in today's society, especially recently. Feels like, I don't know if you saw, but whenever there was like, oh, you're not on social media, but there was a video circulating around, and whenever the blood moon happened recently, not the blood moon, but there was the eclipse that happened. The eclipse that happened most recently, a lot of people recording the eclipse, there was a shadow, like it had to have been huge, right? Like, I mean, it was small on the moon, but for us to see it, this shadow, right? This item had to have been, oh man, I guess, let me try to think. It would have been relative size, would have probably been like the size of probably the shadow size of it was like probably the size of Argentina relative to the Earth, right? So if this was on the moon, maybe it was the size of like Delaware or something. But the shadow, which was on the moon, but it probably looked like, you know, a dime that was just going across the moon. And so,
wow.
And so, yeah, and a lot of people caught this on camera. And so it was circulating throughout like TikTok of, this little shadow that kind of just made this quick zip across, the moon on, during this eclipse or whatever it was called. So maybe that's a big reason why I'm getting called to bring this up, because I've been wanting to talk about aliens and galactic beings and everything on this podcast, but it hasn't, even talking with people, and it just hasn't come into the conversation. I'm like, oh, maybe it's just not time yet. So hell yeah, maybe it's time. So do you know what the beings were that you interacted with? Because I know there's a whole plethora of beings and galactic entities that are out there. Do you know what category, I guess, these would have been that you were talking with in this instance?
First thing that comes up with it was Assyrian and Orion beings. Now, what's been really interesting for me as part of my life and my working as a channel. So working as a channel is in similar things to what Clayton's been saying about accessing the Akashic records, speaking with spirit, and part of channeling can be working with extraterrestrial beings or galactic beings, as I call them. Because it just galactic beings and cosmic friends, cosmic beings. It kind of has more of a endearing relationship name than aliens. But whatever word you want to give that, I've spent a lot of my time and work professionally channeling these different entities and beings to help people heal and evolve. Now, the cool thing was that it wasn't until probably a couple of years after that first experience that I started actually channeling beings like consciously, and then started doing it professionally. But what was like super awesome was that when I started doing that, after a few months of doing that, I had this experience where I remembered I got took back to the ayahuasca ceremony, and it was kind of like, see, this is part of the work that we were telling you. So it was those beings that I'm now channeling that had kind of come through as part of that awakening process through the soul contract to help me step in. So I also work with Arcturian beings, Syrian, Orion. I did a lot of work and do a lot of work with the Palladian beings. Those are kind of some of like the more well-known, the word celebrity comes forth, like the celebrity ETs in the kind of like community that are kind of well-known from star systems and got a quite intensely beautiful relationship with planet Earth and help people heal and evolve. But there's also different extraterrestrial beings that are working with Earth that perhaps I don't know the names of, or that I've not presented their names, or it's not been important. But then when you say like Palladian, there's also different soul groups within those different extraterrestrial races that are working with each other. So the first thing to recognize is that everyone has their own spirit team. Whether you're aware of it or not, everyone has their own spirit team where people or angels, guides, beings, energies are working to help people on planet Earth. Now, you don't have to believe that. My argument would be that if we're doing this alone, it's just pretty messed up because we need some help. We need some help. So in my experience, these beings, whether you're consciously aware of them or not, are assisting and helping. Now, this is not to freak anyone out. This doesn't mean you have free will. You don't necessarily need to be communicating with extraterrestrials, galactic beings, etc. if you don't feel like that's a part of your consciousness evolution. Just like Clayton's mom doesn't want to do Akashic record reading, no one's going to force her to do that. But if someone finds that exciting, like Clayton does, then and are all for it, then you can start inviting that into your life. So if you want to start having more contact with your galactic beings or friends, you can start beginning to put that intention out now. In my highest good, healing and evolution, please become more present in my life. And that was a big part of me putting that prayer out in many different ayahuasca ceremonies, in many different meditations, in many different prayers. I was like, I really want to connect with you. I really want to connect with you. I really want to connect with you. And then over a period of time, then that started becoming more conscious awareness. And now one of my first awarenesses of channeling actually started coming through from watching Daryl Anker, who is the channel of Bashar, who is a very well-known channel of an extraterrestrial being called Bashar, who's got this great content out there. You can go and check it out. Loads and loads of content on helping humanity heal and evolve.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just like, okay, guys, everyone out there, we are on Earth, on planet Earth, in a solar system, just look out at the stars in the sky. And you think we're alone in that? Just ask that, what's the probability of that,
I mean, I have a pretty aware audience. I think I think they'll be pretty open to what you're saying, so we don't really need to dive into convincing them. And honestly, if you have to convince them, it's not for them, right? So you see, there's also this level of me where I see it as like, people aren't going to find this material if they're not looking for it. Like, if you're looking for this episode, you'll find it, right? If you're like looking for aliens, like, and you're trying to become more aware, you'll find this episode. I don't know, but that's kind of the way I look at it. And though, even to kind of articulate what I found interesting is, like, you're saying how you have to, if you're looking for it, it's going to find it, right? And maybe this even comes back to what even you were just saying with, if you are looking for the information to expand your mind and to ask the question of what is out there, well, then they probably found this podcast episode. That's why they're hearing these words. It's like, nobody that's trapped in this place of fear or angst or it's still at a third density level is going to find this information. And if they do, they're not going to be open to it. But even more so, I mean, think about how your ayahuasca situation started. You literally were asking, like, hey guys, if there's anybody out there amongst the stars, like, hit me up. Like, I'm here. I want to know. And sure enough, after your second cup, you had an alien hand come up to you and was like, hey man, like, you asked, we've arrived.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's beautiful that when we start to ride that wave of consciousness, when we start to kind of like surf those synchronicities, and you don't have to have loads of synchronicities where to be expanding, but whatever it is, that wave of consciousness expansion that comes through. And then when we start putting our faith in the mystical, in the magical, which I think is the antidote to the mundane world that we've been told exists, when we start to kind of move towards that beauty, that magic, like I did not know what I was going to get myself into, and it was a great experience for me. But I think it's just like, when we can start putting our faith in those things that excite us, in those mystical, magical realms, the more that we can consciously begin to use them in our own manifestation of a life that we prefer.
I mean, it's really reminding me of the whole, ask and you shall receive thing. If you want something, all you have to do is ask for it. And yeah, kind of losing my train of thought here. So I guess, like, if we bring it back to present day, what are, like, are there common themes that the aliens you interact with, like, give you? Is there, I mean, I guess that really the main question that majority of people would ask is, like, well, if they're out there and have all this information, like, why aren't they helping out? I kind of say it tongue in cheek because I feel like I know the answer, but I'd love to hear, if you've asked those questions, what your articulation, what your experience is with questions of that nature, where it's like, here are all these beings that have this higher level density of understanding. It's like, well, why don't you just come down to earth and fix all the world's problems?
Well, first thing I would say, and it kind of feels like the energy that wants to be shared, is through listening to this podcast tonight, when you go to sleep, put an intention out with the information that you've received that may have opened a little bit of the blinkers. Put an invitation to connect with your higher self and your spirit team and your galactic friends in your sleep tonight for your highest good. Pay attention to your dreams. One of the first ways that extraterrestrial contact will happen with people is in the dream state. One, because our consciousness, our kind of conscious mind is more in the backseat, so we're more open and aware of that, and that we can receive and have those kind of dreamlike experiences. Because if an ET came down in the room in front of you right now, chances are 99% of us would be absolutely scared. If someone just, an ET, just like, even if you think you're ready, there's a certain energy to that is not possible for the human mind, body, spirit complex to assimilate. It would be too much. It would be kind of like the chainsaw when you need the kind of little file to make that. So firstly is recognizing that even if you're like, okay, I'm ready for that, there is a preparation. There's a preparation for ET contact. which is making yourself more aware to spiritual content, doing meditation, listen to more podcasts like this, listen to the channeling videos, beginning to channel yourself. And that prepares yourself to be able to receive that. Because even when I first started channeling, like, even though I was super excited about it and I'd read books and I'd watched videos, etc., I was still scared. And, you know, I had a few experiences when I was in the jungle after ceremony, connecting with different beings, and also in a psilocybin ceremony that we did when we were in Guatemala, my wife and I. When those beings first come to you, there's like an excitement and there's also a fear, because here's the other thing that you need to recognize, or would be beneficial to recognize, is there's so much propaganda and negative propaganda within the mainstream media that is actually out to create a negative viewpoint of extraterrestrial beings. And you can look at this from films from like the 1940s, 1950s. You look at Independence Day.
Yeah.
You don't need to go on Amazon Prime, whatever it is. You need to see that pretty much most sci-fi films are coming about ETs coming to destroy the Earth.
Whoa.
Where's that implanted? That's implanted to create the negative stereotype.
I was just going to say, I just kind of had that epiphany as you were saying that. It's like, you know, they're really there to aid us to be in our highest good. And if we want to go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, it's like, well, wow. Huh. That's really fascinating, because if you go down the rabbit hole of how do you keep people closed off from believing that they have this ability to connect with higher beings, with higher power, like God, for instance. Like, I saw a huge thing with the church. It was, you know, I saw with the church, it was like this huge belief system where let's cut you off from believing that you can't get to heaven. You don't get to talk to God. We'll talk to God for you. So you have to put all your belief in us. And now you can see it with the entertainment industry. You can see it with government even. It's like, we don't want you to believe that you have this ability to talk or to connect with these higher entity aliens. It's like, we are going to tell you what you're allowed to know. You know, we're going to let you believe that, you know, that there have been instances of abductions and they're experimenting on humans, and maybe that's happened. I don't know. But, you know, I've heard mixed things, but maybe it's not bad experiments. Maybe it's more positive experiments. And it's really interesting that you bring that up because of all of the propaganda that we do have, right? And what's really fascinating maybe is, like, I'm thinking of the movie E.T. with, you know, the kids movie that was back in the day where this kid finds, you know, the E.T. But then I think, and I'm having a hard time remembering, but I think like he basically hide him because, like, if the normal person were to have found that E.T., they would have been freaked out and probably killed him. You know, it's because there's that belief that has been instilled in us from a societal standpoint that then makes us afraid to even become in contact with things that ironically could have our highest interest at heart.
Mm-hmm. I think, you know, that's the thing, is if you want to separate people further and further, then you create more and more layers of fear. So you can take that, you know, the word conspiracy gets thrown around, and I think in many ways things get labeled as a conspiracy because it automatically decredits them. So it's like, okay, we label things as a conspiracy, but you can see straight away that you don't have to be. Just look at the facts of how many sci-fi movies are depicted with ETs coming to the Earth to destroy it, and there being a fight. It's like you've got Star Trek, which is kind of like the other side of it. But like the majority, and I'm not saying all, but like the majority of those movies are out there to create that picture and that view. The question again is, like, why is that? Why is there such a disproportionate, like, end of world scenario with extraterrestrial beings? And you can watch Stephen Greer documentaries, Stephen Greer being one of the main proponents of disclosure, who has interviews with many, many different people in governments and other things like that. You can go down that rabbit hole and go down into that, looking into that and kind of all the censorship that happens. But right here and now, just enough is just to recognize, okay, I can see that there's a disproportionate negative viewpoint of extraterrestrial beings in the mainstream media. Now, from my viewpoint, from the viewpoint here, it's to create separation because the power structures on this planet are crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
You can just look at it like that's how I feel. That's what the energy feels like, that they're crumbling. And that coming into conscious awareness of extraterrestrial life, of intelligent life, of other beings, of multidimensional beings here to assist and help us, once that belief becomes mainstay, the kind of
it's
old
over.
chains and shackles of capitalism and the way that the system in society is run, where there's poverty, hunger, starvation, the resources of the planet, there's pollution, all these things. It's like when people actually realize that it's like, okay, there are extraterrestrial intelligent life that's helping us, then those things can't stay. Those things, they're not going to be in the way. So the powers that will do everything to kind of keep that keep that in the dark, so that the power systems on the planet Earth can maintain themselves. So that's one of the main reasons. But I think another question you asked is what is the one of the main messages of the extraterrestrial beings, and it always comes back, and it comes here now, and I can feel it strong, is that everything is available within inside you. Everything that you need is available within inside you, which again is not in alignment with the narrative of you need to go to Walmart and buy this, that, and the other. You need to go, and of course there's things that we need physically, but we need to go this, that, and the other. You need this government for this, that, and the other. You need this, that, and the other. As you were saying, having those buffers in, like the church, having someone to talk to God for you, like the dissolution of those power structures, those ideas is a part of the transition from third to fourth density.
Right.
And that unconditional love is at the heart of it all, that we're all interconnected. And the more that we can believe in that, the more that we can pursue the pursuit of that unconditional love, the more that those things that are out of alignment that will dissolve.
I love that. And because to wrap this all back in, right, my question was, and I guess I wasn't thinking of it this way, but it makes sense now, where the question was, if there are these aliens that are able to help us ascend into our higher purpose, why aren't they here? Well, the question, it's so funny because your answer kind of negates the question almost. And I love whenever that happens, where it's like, well, the realization is that we don't need the aliens. We don't need the aliens to essentially create prosperity or harmony or peace on Earth. And there's this level of almost like they're there, like you were saying with the spirit team, they're there to help us whenever we ask for the help. But at the end of the day, it's almost more empowering if we as humans are able to come to that place as a whole and be like, wait, hold on, let's create all this and make it happen without them. And then once we achieve that, then they'll come in and be like, okay, like, all right, you guys are ready to join the Galactic Federation. Like, let's show you what's actually happening. Like, you figured it out. Like, you figured out as a society how to actually progress to fourth density or fifth density or whatever the next density that we actually needed to get to in order to expose ourselves to the Galactic Federation and to elevate our collective consciousness as humans.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I agree with that. And that feels true. But then for everyone out there who's like, oh, why isn't everyone helping us now? Is like, I would say categorically that there is help here now. It's just not on the front page of the papers. Like, one thing that keeps coming up to share about is in some of these different Stephen Greer documentaries, and you can go and see these and interviews with people from military personnel, that nuclear weapons have been disarmed by extraterrestrials. So these nuclear plants, so for kind of like the catastrophic all-out war, those arms have been disabled by people. It's kind of like, you'd let kind of like a kid play in a sand pit, but if it gets too dangerous, you're going to be like, hey, you need to like not be there. So it feels to me, at least from my belief and consciousness, the way that we're going in this version of planet Earth, that we're moving through to a point where the kind of catastrophic end of days time thing, it's like we've moved past that. We've kind of moved past that threshold. And I know that like even right now, there's even talk about the nuclear war and other things like that kind of arising and kind of threats and stuff like that. Personally, I feel like we've got too much help here that will prevent something like that catastrophic from happening. Of course, I don't have all the answers, but I feel a trust in the fact that we have that help and that support that are helping us move through. But at the same time, you wouldn't do a kid's homework for them because they wouldn't learn the lessons of why they were going to that school. So there's like enough rope there, like on the leash, to kind of let us roam around to kind of experience what we're here to experience. And of course, as we make mistakes and other things, and perhaps don't make the best choices for ourselves, and, you know, like we were talking about before, from different lives, and have an opportunity to take a different view going forward. But I really feel that trust in the help that we have from these different beings, that whether we're aware of it or not, whether they're consciously in our faces, I absolutely trust the synchronicities that arrive in our lives are through different help from different guides and beings, from our higher self, from multidimensional consciousnesses. So the interesting thing again is kind of like on that inquiry, is to the listeners out there, is if you're getting excited by this type of conversation that we're having here today, and you want to invite more of that magic into your life, just begin to put it out there. I'm open to it.
Well, and even to wrap that, or to even bring that in, right? Yesterday, you know, I've kind of had this like loose base of like, I want to talk to aliens, I want to talk to the intergalactic beings. And then even yesterday, it's funny because I didn't initially put that in my pathway to open my channel. And it was like right at the end, whenever I think she was telling me her pathway and she mentioned galactic beings. And I was like, wait a second, what's galactic beings? And she's like, oh, well, you know, like ETs and whatnot. And it's like, wait, I want that a part of my pathway, you know? And so then I, you know, was able to add that into mine. And so then it's by no coincidence that this conversation is being had. The idea of aliens and everything is unwinding, is finally coming to fruition on the Traveling to Consciousness podcast, the day after me actually holding this conversation and saying, I want galactic beings to be a part of my pathway. And now we see it manifesting actually into the podcast, where it's like, all right, you're ready to talk about them. You know what I mean? Like because it's been so wild to me how this subculture, this sub idea of, and I guess you can hear the excitement in my voice. I'm trying to keep my shit together, but there have been so many other podcasts where it's like kind of loosely came up, or it's never really been fully discussed, but now we're finally diving into it on this one. And I just, because, you know, and to tie in I'm getting a little overworked, I think, right now, and hopefully it's not going to deteriorate this podcast. We got it. Because the idea of, you know, I've always known that alien crafts were always seen over top of nuclear sites. And that was something that actually came up on a previous podcast where, you know, this lady was telling me about how she has seen alien ships and whatnot. And I was like, you know, I'm no longer worried about nuclear war. Like every time these wars happen, a thing that they do, the powers that be, is bring up how we could go to nuclear war and it'd be the end of days. And it's like, you know, that's another fear tactic, which I no longer buy into, because there's been plenty of discussion of Air Force pilots talking about how aircrafts, quote unquote, UFOs, have interfered with weapons being shot off or tested and disarmed them essentially. And furthermore, I remember in the most recent disclosure hearing that they had, somebody asked about reports that 19 or 20 nuclear missiles were disarmed, and that missiles are constantly disarmed. Like, are you able to talk on that? And they gave one of their bullshit run around like, oh, like, we're not really sure, that information doesn't really fall under our category, you know, some blah, blah, blah bullshit excuse, which actually highlights the fact that there are aliens disarming weapons of mass destruction in order to make sure that, you know, like you said, we've hit this threshold. We've hit this threshold of getting past whether it was what the Atlanteans weren't able to do. And I'm not really sure the whole fallout there. And maybe you have some channeled information about that, where I was of the mindset that what happened with them was that they had, you know, some injuncture with, you know, whatever it was. And then they toppled because of the inability to get past a certain stage in evolution that got them to this jumping off point. And so I believe, and I think what you're saying has honestly validated this, that we actually have crossed the consciousness threshold of, we've crossed the consciousness threshold where enough people are talking about these things where, it's like, it's inevitable almost. It's like aliens have recognized it and now they're protecting us from ourselves, where enough of us have seen the other side of it. And they're like, okay, we have to preserve this manifestation of humans because they're going to discover it if just to protect them from a handful of people who are still operating from this fear-based mentality where they actually want to perpetuate trauma on the rest of society and keep them down in this lower vibrational frequency. But I guess the core message is that our frequency has risen to a high enough level where aliens are interfering with malevolence that people are carrying out on the rest of humanity.
Yeah, I think that we have passed the threshold in terms of preventing nuclear war in that sense. I also feel like the transformation that we're going through on the earth right now, we've had the pandemic, we've now got the Ukraine-Russia war that's coming up, and there's kind of inflation and there's other things, and it's quite a lot of pressure in many different places. It's kind of like that analogy of the carbon being pressurized into the diamond. So it's kind of that feeling that we're going through that point. I think it's great to have that kind of feeling and knowing that we have the help that's available that's going to kind of prevent all-out nuclear war, as we've ascertained in our viewpoints and beliefs. But I don't think that it gives us an excuse to bypass our own personal blueprint of evolution, which is synchronous and absolutely in time with our own recognition of where we've been out of alignment with ourselves, and then coming into the truth of who we are through the transformation of trauma and our individual responsibility to changing our own world. Now, what comes up quite a lot for me is the idea that we need to save the world. Now, I used to feel like that when I used to run my recruitment company, which is a renewable energy recruitment company. And that was kind of a big step in for me in terms of stepping into kind of feeling a little bit more caring for outside of myself. But there was also this feeling of, and I think this happens sometimes, there's this feeling of a complete burden of, I have to save the world. I mean, that is a burden. And again, that doesn't mean not saying that you shouldn't take action, compost, recycle, do whatever you want to do for the environment, whatever feels true. But it's like this idea that I wish to present is it's the transformation of the individuated consciousness that transforms the world. It's like you don't have to transform the world. You only need to transform yourself. And then that will then start showing up in your reality. It's a big thing that's come up for me when the war started happening, when in my own meditations of kind of sending out prayers, calling on beings, you're just saying help, please, peace on earth. What I could see was the reflection of straight away in my meditations and my own channelings was, where in your own being are you in conflict? Where in your own mind are you conflicted? Where in your own relationships with your actual neighbors who are nearby you, where are you having those arguments? Where are you out of alignment? Where is that unconditional love lacking in your immediate vicinity? And I could see that. And I had this feeling of oh my gosh, if I can't get on with my neighbor about a dog or something like that, if I'm having a conflict with people in my direct vicinity, I felt like this great despair of oh my gosh, this war on some level is a reflection of the consciousness transformation. So I invite everyone, and again, this is just my own perspective. If you don't feel it, leave it by the wayside. Anything I say, I always say this to people, if it doesn't resonate, just leave it. But I think there's an invitation for us to see in that where the conflict is in our own life and begin to heal that. And I argue that would have the biggest effect upon peace on earth.
100%. I mean, yeah. I'm all for the idea of if something doesn't resonate, leave for you, but I've never heard anyone disagree with that. That's something that I believe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to shoot me a message if I'm wrong here, but I believe that that's actually a universal truth of, if there's something wrong in the world, it's like, how are you creating that within your own world? And I also want to point out that I think it's a beautiful, I guess it's probably seen as spiritual bypassing is the term I've heard before of, what I maybe my my ecstatic rant was starting to manifest, which was this idea of, oh, well, we're all good and don't need to do anything, because the way that I was talking, which completely kudos to you for bringing me back, was of this light of, oh, well, we've already hit that threshold. We don't need to worry about anything. The aliens got us. We're safe. And I mean, I can definitely see the error, not the error, but I can see how that's a slippery slope to take us all the way back to where maybe takes us back several hundred years. Because you're totally right. Like I completely agree that just because we've hit this point of, let's call it alien protection point, APP, it doesn't negate us. It's not like I can wake up tomorrow and no longer do any of the work that I've discussed of healing the integrated or healing the wounded masculine, healing, these issues of always telling the truth, healing these issues that I've had with bullies, all this stuff that we've talked about in regards to the soul blueprint. So, kudos to you for also acknowledging that that's not something that we can overlook just because we can see this galactic protection around us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all valid. I think it all interweaves, and there's so much of what you've shared there and summarized that I think interweaves in and out of each day on the level of relevance of it, on the viewpoint that you take, and there's keys to take away from the kind of feeling like, oh, like we say, like the feeling of like, okay, we're not alone, and the feeling of like, actually, we want to work through this ourselves. Like the kind of combination of that, the empowerment of that. One of my big journeys when I kind of had this initial, I would say, encounter with extraterrestrial beings, and the kind of like the thrill and the excitement of that, which was like a rocket ship for me on my own evolution. That was like the gateway. I know you talked about different paths with your teacher and the Akashic records, like different parts of the path. That for me was like an absolute portal opener of something that absolutely grabbed my excitement. It was so out there, was so interesting that I was like, oh my gosh. And I, that led me to being tenacious in my development of learning to channel, and then subsequently teaching other people. Along that path and that journey, I've had a very, we built a house in the jungle one time, as you do, but like we built a house in the jungle when we were living in Iquitos in the Amazon. We were going to move in there, and we ended up didn't move into that. It was a long project, but we ended up giving the house to the community, and it was after the pandemic. We decided we don't want to live in the jungle. We were doing a lot more online work, and we felt like we could reach more people by being online, doing our podcasts and our online work, et cetera, and like living in the valley, the Sacred Valley where we live now, where it's a little bit more accessible, and it's also really good for people who come and work with us, because you don't have to go out into the isolation of the jungle to have those experiences. But the point of what I'm saying is, when we built that house, my wife and I, we were so excited that when we were so isolated in the jungle, we were so excited that we were going to get more physical ET contact. And we were so excited. And we were so excited, and it was in all the intentions of building that house. But what happened for us along the way is the more and more that we continue to develop the spiritual, telepathic, energetic, metaphysical connection with our galactic friends and spiritual family, we recognized we didn't need the physical contact. The physical contact was an excitement that brought us to recognize that ET contact disclosure is here and now. You don't have to wait 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years or whenever it is that ETs come down and are like, yeah, we're here, we've been helping you. The invitation, and I can feel it from everyone, is like, we're here now. Like if you want direct access, we're available to each and everyone individually. And that's what we teach in our Learn to Channel courses. That's what we teach in our intuitive mentorship courses, is teaching people how to access that here and now, how it's available here and now. So the physical can be a distraction. The physical,
Gotcha.
just like the world, like we have, and everyone can relate to that, how the physical reality can be the distraction from the inner work. You can recognize on some level that this idea of physical ET contact is actually missing the message. In my experience, that the ET contact, the kind of what you described about the ships going past the moon and stuff like that, that for me is like a smoke signal or a flare that basically says, we're here, but like, what's the message? What's the point of that?
Right.
So if everyone's like, okay, we just need to keep investigating, and again, perfectly valid path for actually recognizing and to out all the UFO researchers and all these things. Absolutely fantastic, very valid work, very important work. But the invitation that I'm saying out to this audience, which I can feel already knows this to be true, is like, if it's available to me here and now, why wouldn't I do that? And if I can start, you can look at a video of an extraterrestrial footage and you can be like, okay, great, this means that there's life out in the universe. And I think from what we've been speaking about, probably 80, 90% plus the people listening to this are already like, yeah, we already get that. What are you on about? That's like, let's use that. Use these tools to go from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, metaphorically. So then we can start actually interacting with these conscious civilizations that are here, that in many senses, so if we talked about fourth, fifth density, sixth density beings, and the awareness of the intelligence, just like the Akashic Records, is just a similar way of accessing information. It's just a different face of God, the face of the universe, whatever you want to call it. That these civilizations, these energies, these beings have been through the mistakes that we've been through and are able to impart the knowledge that can help accelerate and catalyze and quantum leap our civilization to the one that we actually want to be. Now, where it kind of gets trippy, and I can feel this and I go into it, is that then you look at different multiple timelines and versions of Earth which will arise based upon the choices that we make. So just like I kind of talked about before, of when I was bullied and I decided to hit that person, that took me down a route for 5-6 years of nearly getting killed, being bullied, living in fear. Whereas if, like, say my grandparent was an ET in that situation and showed me a kind of more conscious path to resolve that, not to get involved, showed me, don't get involved, nothing's going to happen, in a week it's all going to pass, I could have had a different trajectory. So what the invitation from our galactic friends and being is to begin to consciously choose the reality that you want to be in. Now, what that means, and the message that's coming through, what that means is be in alignment with yourself. Like the whole theme of what we've been talking about is choose that joy, that passion. That's something that feels, again, it's not about right or wrong. It's about what feels in alignment, what feels true. And you can know that feeling, and everyone knows that feeling when you feel in alignment. It's something that can't be fully described. It's like, that feels true. That feels in alignment. Right. Beginning to follow and trust that. And what the recognition is in terms of whether a war happens, whether there's conflict, whether there's a famine, whether the earth goes down one way, what you can on it, and this is kind of like where the fear might come into kind of human existence. What is almost a guarantee is that if you keep choosing yourself into alignment to the best of your ability, you will live the incarnation and life that you came here to live. That might not be the one where you live to 100 years old and do this, that, and the other, and have the company and all these other things. But the invitation is and this is where the trusting of the universe comes in, is if you continue to trust, become more aware of what your alignment is and choose that, you can almost guarantee that you're choosing a higher version of yourself. Now, it might not be the enlightened version of yourself. Coming back to the other analogy that they want to share about is when you shared about just getting in the car, that choosing that higher alignment, the choosing that the most aligned version of yourself is like getting in the car. You don't know where that's going. And then you're in the car and you get to the crossroads and then you choose another aligned version of yourself. But here's the thing, to not spread fear, if you go down a road and then you take a right and you're actually like, actually, I feel less aligned, you can always reverse back up and take the other direction. And then with that knowledge, you'll get better and better of choosing your alignment. And part of that choosing the alignment, sometimes tying in all what's been shared about the past lives, is sometimes you have to choose something that's out of alignment to recognize what your alignment is, to give yourself as a reflection point. So then we can start using that knowledge that we've accumulated from these many different lives to start thinking to myself, how can I radically choose my most aligned life here now, and trust that that's the only decision that I have to make, and allow everything else to unfold, release control, having no expectation of what it might be.
So let's tie this into I love it. And where my mind's going is like the idea of alignment, right? Because now the question becomes is that theoretically speaking, we want to be aligned at every single moment in time so that we can get to our destination quicker, right? So theoretically speaking, let's use the analogy of the car driving from New York to Peru, right? So if my end goal is to get to Peru, which is hypothetically speaking, and my actual being the metaphor for Peru being the metaphysical representation of, having one of the greatest podcasts of all time, having a dog, having a wife, having kids, living all over the world, that being my metaphorical representation of Peru. For me personally, like those are some of my goals. Obviously, I've got a shit ton of other ones, but we'll just say all of those are just in Peru. And I'm currently in New York, right? Based on what you're kind of illustrating is that even if I somehow end up all the way in California, which is, obviously on the West Coast, not the direct route to Peru, because I was out of alignment for some choices that ended up in California, I still have access to get to Peru. I still have access to get to my higher self. I just need to find my alignment, and the universe will, excuse me, the universe will reorientate itself to show me the route from California to Peru. Is that kind of an illustration of how you're, depicting this?
I think I would talk more about that illustration. I like where you're going with it. I think to add on to what you're saying, the important part of that process is to release the necessity for Peru to be your destination. You could have Peru as the intention, but it could have somehow taken you to California, and that was actually turns out to be the most aligned thing for you
at the time.
So yeah, and I'll just use the traveling idea for me is that I thought I was going to go back to India and travel India by motorcycle, and that was like what my excitement was. And I've actually found myself in Peru, and Peru actually feels like it's more of alignment, but originally it felt like India. So if I was like adamant of it being India, and I was like, no, it's India. I set out to go to India. I went to India, and then I was going to go back to India. When I planned to do studying in the rainforest, I planned to come straight back to India, buy a motorcycle and travel. I put my seatbelt on the plane, and I was like, I'm not coming back. And I was like, what the? This is going to be a great motorcycle journey. I felt that I knew it, and I was like, what is that about? I was like, no, I'm coming back. I'm coming back. That was like 6 years ago. Subsequently, I met my wife. Subsequently, I've healed absolutely countless levels and layers of trauma, living more free than I've ever felt it was possible, and have our business Casa Galactica and live my life out in alignment in service to all. And then I got a motorcycle. I was like, this is awesome. And when I got on the motorcycle for the first time a couple of years ago here, when we bought one, when we traveled around a load, I was like, this is the experience that I was looking for in India, was the traveling of the motorcycle through traveling through the Andean mountains, just like life-changing experiences. But the point, coming back to that analogy, was that if I was stuck and focused and been like, my intention when I got in the car was to go, no matter what happens, I'm going to India, I wouldn't have ended up here, and I wouldn't have had all those aforementioned things. So I think that what the powerful process of that, following that breadcrumb, again, as we talked about from the idea, if I was just like focused on, no, I want to have more and more physical contact with ETs, then I wouldn't have started my channeling business. I wouldn't have been able to help all the people I've been able to help with that, because I wouldn't have been driven to allow that to shift and change into actually the metaphysical contact with extraterrestrials. If I was so adamant on it being physical contact and did everything and became like a UFO researcher and doing all these and researching the physical phenomenon, I probably would have missed out those interactions which were only available to me because I wasn't focused on the physical.
Gotcha.
So to summarize that, whatever journey that you're going on, do you, I don't know if you remember the movie Heat. Do you remember the movie
Sounds
Heat
familiar.
with Robert De Niro?
Sounds familiar. Remind me.
There's a line in the movie Heat where he's kind of like a bank robber, and there's a line where basically he's like, you have to be ready to let go and pack up your whole life in 10 minutes. And he has to be ready to like let go. And I think that comes up, and it's like, obviously you don't need to like let go of your life in 10 minutes, but the idea is like, if those friends, those work, the job, the relationships, the things that you're doing, the food that you're eating, the media that you're consuming, et cetera, are no longer in alignment, are you prepared to let it go because you know something else is there? It's like, are you ready to let that go?
Wow.
So that's the powerful stuff. And it doesn't mean that you need to let go of, some relationships can work out, some jobs can be improved, but like, are you ready to let go of the parts of that are no longer serving you? So I think that any journey that you're taking out, if you're getting in a car now, I can imagine someone's just like packing their bags and be like, they talked about this journey from New York to Peru, I'm just going to do it. So if any of you there outside in your car there, just be prepared that like the best thing that you can do for yourself is follow your excitement about that journey. But those breadcrumbs that are taking you there, don't become obsessed with the destination, because the destination may just be a stepping stone. It may just be another breadcrumb. But the excitement about you going to a certain destination had to arise, because that's the only thing that could communicate with your soul to illuminate the fact that you wanted to move. And then when you get there, allow that to change. Don't be so focused on the outcome, because if you become focused on the outcome, you risk abandoning yourself once again.
Oh, a lot of that resonated. And so to summarize, you're in New York, you think all that you want is in Peru. And the only reason that you're thinking it's Peru is because that's the only way that you could get that jolt through your body in order to get out of your front door in New York. Yet as you're traveling down to Peru, you hit Texas, and something in Texas says, you need to go to California. You're like, fuck, all right, well, I think I'm going to Peru, but let's go to California first. I mean, I can always go back to Peru later. You end up in California and you're like, oh shit, it's like nice here. Like, this is everything I was looking for anyhow. Like, this is everything and more than I thought Peru was going to be. And so you end up in California. Is that maybe a more accurate way of illustrating what you're saying?
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful summary. I think I have nothing to add to that. I think that summarizes it pretty great.
Cool. And then I have a feeling we're coming up on time. I can feel like there's a little bit of a pool, but a question I do want to inject, and we'll see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Maybe it's a short answer. Maybe we dive into it for long. But whenever you're contacting galactic beings, is it normally just like one or two like beings? Is it like a cluster of beings? Is it random who you come into contact with? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah. So there's things called collective consciousness or collectives, where there's a group of beings or soul groups of beings that will telepathically communicate, or in different ways communicate with their same thoughts, the same mind, the one mind. Now, the analogy of that, without the negative connotations, is kind of think of like the Borg from Star Trek, without the kind of like desire to assimilate everyone. It's a kind of like friendly Borg. You can think of that as a collective consciousness. So there's kind of one mind, there's one thought, there's everyone doing the same thing. So that collective consciousness can communicate in that way. Now, within those collective consciousness, again, depending on which different type of being that you connect with, there's some beings that are physical, semi-physical, non-physical. And within that, there's individuated consciousnesses. Like, you can think more of like human beings. So you can kind of feel like that there's kind of like an individuation between us speaking here, between you listening, you recognize, identify as an individuation. And everyone has that certain personality. So there can be some separate beings that can have a certain personality or that within that. Although generally what I find is the kind of higher up into the densities that you get, it becomes more of a collective consciousness. even that, when I'm channeling more and more these days, there's like Arcturians, Syrians, Orions, Palladians, other beings, plant spirits, Noya Rao, Blue Lotus, Ayahuasca, whatever it is, that's communicating. And it's kind of that they all lend their flavor to the communication. So you can kind of imagine it like being a committee that has a one spokesperson, but that spokesperson is not necessarily one person. It's kind of one voice. It's one stream of consciousness, because that seems to be how it works, that everyone has their own contribution and energy to do that. And the way that that consciousness is assimilated, to use that word again, is the consciousness stream comes through, and it's that wave of consciousness that speaks through. So there's no need for the individuated ego, because the individuation of the ego of the third density and any ego is a necessity to be separate. And the more and more that the consciousness advances, the more and more the conscious beings, or the level of consciousness advances, there's less and less of that individuation, because there's less and less need for that ego, because it becomes more of a one heart, one love, one consciousness.
So I understood everything you said, but I think that there might be some people that are going to get caught up on that. So, wow, that's beautifully put. And I'm feeling like it's time to wrap up. So before I do, guys, you're going to look down on your phone and there's a rewind 30-second button. Click that a couple times and listen to that again, because that is very powerful information right there. So after you do that, come back to this point. And Michael, thank you for being on the show. That was absolutely incredible. I'm honored and grateful that we finally got to the extraterrestrial beings. I do want to give you the floor at this point to promote any of your stuff, give any more words of wisdom. I'm going to grab your links for you, throw them in the show notes below. So yeah, the floor is yours. Feel free to tell my audience whatever it is that you would love to tell them.
Well, firstly, thank you. If you made it this far, this was awesome. I really enjoyed it. Thanks everyone for being here. Clayton, thank you so much for having me on. Absolute pleasure conversation. I feel like I've been in your front room just chatting and just going, we've gone on our roller coaster of all different places. This has been super thrilling. So thank you very much. So you can check out our website, casagalactica.com. I just recommend that you go to that website first, casagalactica.com, and Clayton will have that in the links there. First thing I invite you to do is just subscribe to our newsletter, because if you do that straight away, you're going to get a guide, a handbook to help activate your intuition completely free. So you could just get that straight in your inbox. And then we've just put on our website as well, part of that when you sign up, that you'll get a 5-hour fundamentals of trauma healing workshop, which is a channeling workshop that I did with a multidimensional healing ceremony in it, and really, really digestible ways that you can start healing trauma and showing up for yourself and your family in your life. So if you just get those two things alone, that's going to really help transform your life. And then we also give anyone 20% discount on our private channeling sessions, learn to channel sessions, our trauma healing sessions, our online intuitive readings that you can find on our website. So just sign up to the newsletter, and then you'll get that all in your inbox. That's the first thing. Second thing is, we've got from September this year our Ayahuasca Healing and Evolution Retreats, which are 10 days with 4 ayahuasca ceremonies, but they're just 4 people. So we work with people in the smallest, most intimate groups that we've ever worked with before. And the intention of these groups is to absolutely catalyze your own healing and evolution, to integrate a lot of the topics that we've talked about today. We have channeling workshops, we have one-on-one sessions, we have group workshops, we have qigong, we have ayahuasca ceremonies, we have also 8+ different plant medicines to help clean the body, mind, and spirit, to help open and activate your intuition, empower your healing, and embody your truth. And we're in the beauty of the Andean Mountains in Pisac in the Sacred Valley of Peru, which is the land of Machu Picchu, of the Incan ruins, which we also have add-on tours as well, that you can go and see all these ancient sites and Incan ruins. And I run these retreats with my beautiful and amazing wife, Jamie Thornhill, who is an amazing intuitive medium. She's one of my biggest teachers, my best friend, love of my life. She's amazing, and she is absolutely awesome. And I'm so excited to do this work with her. We've studied and trained in the Shipibo tradition in the Amazon rainforest, and we've run our multidimensional center for healing and evolution for quite some time now. And these retreats that we've come back at after the pandemic are our most intimate and authentic recognitions of our true selves that we share with you. And it's going to be a ride. It might be tough. It's awesome. But even if you can't make it to Peru, if you can't start that car and you're stuck in New York, then I invite you to connect with us online, because we've got a whole host of courses and online sessions that we will be able to help you here and now. Everything we've talked about learning to channel, by the way, just want to let you know, everyone can learn to channel. You don't have to be some special person or anything like this. Everybody can learn to channel. Everybody's intuitive. It's just about recognizing what's here and now. Everybody can heal trauma, and we're just really passionate about imparting tools, gifts that can help people to live their true selves, to express their soul blueprint, to live a more happy, harmonious, loving life with ourselves, with the planet, with each other. So check out casagalactica.com. All those things will be there. Plus, we've got a whole host of other videos, podcasts, and articles on our growth portal, where we dive into topics and share things for consciousness expansion. So thank you so much to everybody. And of course, when you reach out on our website as well, if you want to learn more about the work that we do, please feel free to contact us, and we do 30-minute free consultations with everyone. So if you want to learn more about that, just click there at the bottom of the page on the side, click for a 30-minute free Zoom consultation, and we'll be happy to jump on and talk more about how we can be a specific benefit to you and your own personal circumstances. So just absolutely prayers and blessings out to every one of you, to the planet, to all beings, just that all beings may be free at peace and in oneness. Thanks so much.
I love it. And actually, at the end of July, I'm 99% sure I'm going to be coming to Machu Picchu, because I want to check it out. So, maybe we'll have to do something or meet up or something, and we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Yeah, 100%. Hit me up.
Hell yeah. Cool. Well, we could talk about that offline, but while we're still online, guys, we opened up the galactic wormhole. So the channel is now intergalactic, for lack of a better term. So digest that stuff, guys. Maybe rewind it a little bit. Definitely, if you have more galactic questions, hit up Michael, hit up myself. And, with that being said, let's keep growing together.